Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will explore a new case, the case of Daniel LaPlante. In 1986, Frank Bowen, with his two daughters, Tina Bowen and Karen Bowen, experienced a series of terrifying events at their home in Townsend, Massachusetts. The girls initially believed that the house was haunted when strange phenomena began to occur, such as furniture being shuffled, strange noises coming from the walls, and threatening words written on mirrors and walls in a red material that looked like blood. These events left the family in extreme fear. Frank Bowen initially thought that his daughters were imagining things or playing a prank, but all doubts disappeared when he was faced with the terrifying truth. The person behind these bizarre events was Daniel LaPlante, a 16-year-old boy who lived nearby. In addition to trying to scare the Bowen family, Daniel secretly lived in their house for about 2 months. Taking refuge in the walls and narrow spaces between rooms, Daniel used secret passageways in the house to spy on and manipulate the family. The truth was discovered when Mr. Frank found Daniel in the house. Confronting him with a weapon in his hand, police later determined that Daniel had cut holes in the walls to move around undetected. Turning the Frank home into a hiding place, Daniel LaPlante, often referred to as Danny, was born on May 15, 1970, in Townsend, Massachusetts. He grew up with his parents and 2 brothers. But his childhood was far from happy. Daniel endured various forms of abuse from his father, including physical, emotional, and abuse. After cutting ties with his father, Daniel began living with another man, who also treated him cruelly. Their home was an unhealthy environment, filthy and cluttered with garbage, with a yard full of trash and stray animals roaming freely. This atmosphere contributed to Daniel's growing disillusionment with life. He became rebellious, and his teachers frequently complained about his behavior. What began as troubling behavior eventually escalated into self-destructive tendencies. Daniel struggled socially, performed poorly in school, and was described by his classmates as strange, unhygienic, and unpleasant. Most avoided him because of his appearance and behavior, concerned by his actions. The school referred Daniel to a psychiatrist for help during their sessions. It was discovered that Daniel had dyslexia and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. While the psychiatrist initially appeared to want to help, he instead exploited Daniel's vulnerabilities. Over the course of a year, the psychiatrist coerced Daniel into an abuse relationship, further compounding the trauma he had already endured throughout his life. By 1986, as a teenager, desperate to escape his life of torment, Abuse began committing petty thefts in his neighbors' homes. Initially, he focused on stealing specific items, but over time, he shifted his focus to instilling fear in the residents. He started leaving cryptic, unsettling messages, rearranging household items to confuse the homeowners, and scattering crumbs and food stains throughout the houses. One of the homes he targeted belonged to the Bowen family. The Bowen family lived in Townsend, Massachusetts. In the same county as Daniel, the household consisted of Frank and his 2 daughters. The girls' mother had recently passed away from cancer, leaving the family grief-stricken and struggling to adjust to their drastically changed lives. When Daniel broke into their home, he noticed the family portraits, which radiated a sense of closeness and warmth. This enraged Daniel, who felt deeply unhappy with his own life. To him, such a family seemed like an impossible dream. It was then that he devised a sinister plan. Toward the end of 1986, one evening, Tina Bowen received an anonymous call from a young man who introduced himself as Daniel LaPlante. When Tina asked how he had gotten her phone number, Daniel claimed he attended the same school as her and had obtained it through a mutual friend. Curious, Tina asked if they had met before, and Daniel provided a false description of himself to spark her interest. He claimed to have bright blonde hair, an athletic build, and said he lived in her neighborhood. During their conversations, which continued for about a week, Daniel was very polite and charming, successfully gaining Tina's trust. After much persuasion, Daniel convinced Tina to go on a date with him. He offered to pick her up from her home, and his imagined charm seemed to win her over. However, when the big evening arrived, Daniel made no effort to clean up his appearance when he showed up at the Bowen house and rang the doorbell. Tina immediately realized that everything he had claimed on the phone was untrue. As she opened the door, she saw that Daniel looked nothing like his description. His clothes were dirty, his physique was far from athletic, and his hair was dark instead of blonde. Despite her disappointment, Tina felt there might still be some trace of the charming man she had spoken with beneath it all. So, she decided to give him a chance. While they were walking together, Tina shared with Daniel that her mother had recently passed away from cancer. Instead of offering comfort, Daniel began asking her unsettling questions about her mother's appearance after death, what it was like to witness death up close, and the extent of her mother's suffering before she passed. The conversation was so unusual and inappropriate that it felt nothing like the casual evening chats Tina was used to. An hour into the date, Tina didn't leave, though she found the entire experience deeply strange and upsetting. She had never encountered someone so fixated on her mother's death, and Daniel's blunt, insensitive questions showed no regard for the pain she and her family had endured. This left she feeling profoundly sad. Tina later expressed her sadness to her younger sister, saying how much she missed their mother and how desperately she wished to speak with her again. One evening, while home alone, Tina and her sister decided to try contacting their mother's spirit using a Ouija board. They went down to the basement and, with little expectation that it would work, began the ritual. However, their efforts were unsuccessful when they heard their father returning from work. The sisters quickly hid the Ouija board and went back to their room. Later that night, just after midnight, Tina and Karen were startled awake by a series of knocks on their bedroom wall. Excited, the sisters believed it was their mother attempting to communicate with them. They felt their spiritualism session had not been in vain. When they asked directly if it was truly their mother, a loud knock sounded on the wall, which the girls took as a definite yes. For several nights, strange events continued to occur, but only Tina and Karen were aware of them. However, when they tried to show their father the supernatural activity, nothing happened. It all began with faint knocks on the walls, but soon objects started disappearing. Items left on the table were found scattered on the floor the next day. The girls noticed furniture moving on its own, and food and drinks vanishing mysteriously. These occurrences unsettled them, and they began doubting that it was their mother trying to communicate. After all, their mom wouldn't frighten them like this. When the girls explained everything to Frank, he dismissed their claims. He believed the so-called supernatural events were just the girls acting out. Frank assumed Tina and Karen were seeking attention and tried to remain patient, convinced they would eventually overcome their pain. However, as time went on, Tina and Karen became increasingly terrified of their own home. The knocks on the walls and other strange happenings were driving them to the brink. Still, Frank refused to believe Tina and Karen. In desperation, Tina decided to confront the spirit directly. Now, she's certain it wasn't their late mother. Tina grabbed a knife from the kitchen and, along with Karen, went down to the basement. On one of the walls, they found a message written in red letters, which they immediately assumed was blood. The message read, "I am in your room. Find me." Terrified, Tina and Karen ran to the neighbor's house. Desperate to escape the torment they believed was caused by the spirit they had summoned, Tina and Karen anxiously waited for their father to return home from work. When Frank arrived, he immediately noticed the chaos upon seeing the message on the basement wall. He quickly realized it was written in tomato sauce. Furious, he lashed out at his daughters, scolding them for going too far and damaging their own home. He told them they needed a healthier way to deal with their pain, and even threatened to send Tina and Karen to a psychotherapist after this unsettling incident. Everything seemed to go back to normal. The supernatural events stopped, and the family began to relax. Life resumed its usual peaceful rhythm. The girls behaved calmly, and Frank continued his work as if nothing had happened. However, One day, a knock on the wall signaled the ghost's return. Tina and Karen, consumed by fear, returned to the basement, where all their troubles had begun. Suddenly, they heard another loud knock from upstairs. Panicked, they ran to Tina's bedroom, only to find a chilling message written in large red letters on the wall. "I'm back. Find me if you can." Tina grabbed her sister's hand, and they fled the house, seeking help from their neighbor, alarmed by the sister's story and their state. The neighbor promptly called Frank to inform him of what was happening. When Frank heard that his daughters were involved in another disturbing incident, he rushed home to address the situation. Convinced his daughter's actions were escalating, he decided to get to the bottom of it. Upon arriving at the neighbor's house, Frank questioned Tina and Karen about the events, shaking with fear. They said everything, including the unsettling message they had discovered, determined to put an end to their fears. Frank decided to go back to the house alone to investigate. As he stepped inside, Frank was met with chaos. The entire house was in disarray. Clothes and belongings were scattered across the floor. He immediately realized this mess was far beyond what his daughters could have caused. When he entered Tina's bedroom, he found the same disturbing message the girls had described earlier, and now an additional chilling note was scrawled beneath it. "Marry me, confused and uneasy." Frank felt something was terribly wrong. A shiver ran down his spine as he sensed a presence behind him. Turning around, his heart sank. In the corner of the room stood a young man. The man was dressed in Frank's late wife's wedding dress and a blonde wig, even more horrifying. He was holding an axe, though shaken to his core. Frank quickly realized one thing. This was no ghost. Frank chased the intruder until this man fled and disappeared from sight immediately afterward. He called the police. Investigators conducted a thorough search of the house and discovered a hidden space behind a closet in one of the rooms. Inside the wall, they found a small door leading to an underground cavity or passageway between the house's walls, large enough for someone to move through. When a police officer entered the hidden area, they found Daniel curled up in a ball in one corner. Daniel was arrested, with Frank identifies him as the man in the wedding dress who threatened Frank with an axe. Later, authorities uncovered more troubling details about the incident. Tina confided in her father about an unsettling date she had gone on with Daniel a few months earlier. Investigators determined that Daniel had used the hidden passageways to torment Tina and Karen inside the space. Police found a sleeping bag, clothing belonging to the family, and leftover food. The most disturbing discovery, however, was that the secret space connected to every room in the house. This allowed Daniel to move through the walls undetected, spy on the family, and communicate with the girls through the distinct knocking sounds that had terrified them at the time of his arrest. 16-year-old Daniel was sent to a juvenile facility when he turned 17. Court documents were filed to begin trying his case as an adult. He faced multiple charges, including robbery, burglary, and property damage. In October 1987, Daniel was released on bail after his mother paid nearly $10 for his release. After returning to his mother and stepfather's home, Daniel was instructed to stay out of trouble and await his court date on December 11, 1987. However, he ignored these instructions and resumed burglarizing nearby homes. During one of these break-ins, he found a weapon, which he took with him. In November, his stepfather discovered the weapon hidden in a laundry basket. When confronted, Daniel lied and refused to reveal where he had obtained the weapon, although his stepfather confiscated it. It was unclear whether Daniel had access to another one. On December 1, 1987, Daniel walked approximately 2 kilometers to reach the large, comfortable mansion of the Gustafson family. The family consisted of 33-year-old Priscilla, her husband Andrew, their 2 children, 7-year-old Abigail and 5-year-old William, and Priscilla is pregnant with their 3rd child. The Gustafson family were a close-knit family dedicated to helping others. Andrew worked as a lawyer and was often away from home, while Priscilla worked at a kindergarten. sang in a choir, and actively participated in their church. On that tragic day, when Daniel broke into their home, only Priscilla and William were there. At this time, Abigail was still at school. He overpowered Priscilla, dragged her into the bedroom, and assaulted her. Afterwards, he suffocated her with a pillow to muffle the sound, and then attacked her twice in the head. Once Priscilla was dead, Daniel turned his attention to William. He carried the boy to a filled bathtub on the second floor and drowned him. Shortly after Abigail arrived home from school, Daniel immediately grabbed Abigail, took her to the bathtub on the first floor, and drowned her in it. Just like William, when Andrew arrived at the house around 6 p.m., he immediately sensed something was wrong. The children were not playing as they usually did, and his wife did not come to greet him in the hallway when he called out for Priscilla. There was no response. Concerned, Andrew went to the bedroom, where he discovered a horrifying scene. Priscilla was lying lifeless in an unnatural position, with bloodstains all around, in shock. Andrew called the police right away. He could not even search the house to find the children when the investigators arrived. They found Andrew in such a state of shock that he was unable to think clearly during their search of the house. The police discovered the bodies of the children. Among the evidence collected were 2 spent cartridges from a weapon, strands of the attacker's hair on the bed and on Priscilla's body, an open beer can, and shoe prints near the entrance. Suspicion quickly fell on Daniel, a recently paroled young man who lived near the Gustafson home. He was known for his skill in breaking into nearby houses, which made him a prime suspect. While investigators were searching for him, Daniel was at the city library when questioned about his whereabouts on December 1. He claimed he had been at a family birthday party. He denied any involvement in the case of the Gustafson family and expressed sorrow over what had occurred. The police initially appeared to believe his story, but later, they visited Daniel's home with additional questions and a search warrant. When Daniel was sitting on the porch, spotted the police car. He immediately realized they were there for him, so he fled and hid in the woods. Daniel's actions confirmed the investigators' suspicions were right, and them to search Daniel's house inside. They discovered several shoe soles that matched the footprints found near the Gustafson home. They also found fibers that appeared to be connected to the crime. A sock with saliva stains likely used to gag Priscilla. A .22 caliber shell casing similar to one found at the crime scene, and a cordless phone stolen from the Gustafson home. Additionally, the Daniel family's car was examined. They revealing weapon in the glove compartment. Police quickly called for reinforcements to search for Daniel, the main suspect in the case of the Gustafson family. Over 50 officers participated in the search, aided by helicopters and sniffer dogs that thoroughly combed the forest. A crucial tip came from an emergency call. The caller revealed that Daniel had threatened her with a gun and forced her to drive him away in her truck. Thankfully, she managed to escape. This information helped investigators identify the model of the car Daniel used to flee on the run. He committed several additional robberies, leaving witnesses at the scenes who later reported him to the police. Daniel LaPlante was arrested on December 3, 1987, at 6:03 p.m. while trying to hide behind a garbage can in Ayers Town. At the time of his arrest, he was armed and had committed several crimes while evading capture. Daniel's trial began in October 1988, when he was 18 years old. Although most of his crimes occurred when he was a minor, the judge decided to try him as an adult. Daniel pleaded not guilty. Despite strong evidence against him, Daniel's defense claimed he was mentally unfit to stand trial, but a psychiatric evaluation determined that he could understand right from wrong and was fit for trial. The jury found Daniel LaPlante guilty of murdering the Gustafson family and sentenced him to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole in 1993. Daniel attempted to appeal his sentence, arguing that the search warrant for his home was issued improperly, but he was unsuccessful. In 2000, Daniel requested a transfer to another prison due to safety concerns after receiving threats from fellow inmates, and this request was approved then, in 2013. Daniel expressed dissatisfaction with not being allowed to practice his religion freely, because his rituals would have required ingredients like blood and banned substance. In 2017, Daniel submitted a petition seeking a reduced sentence, claiming he was under 18 when he committed the crimes. So he should not be sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. He aimed to serve just one life sentence instead of 3 consecutive ones. However, his request was denied because he was required to serve time for each life he had ruined. His statement to the judge was as follows: "I cannot adequately express the weight of my actions. I have taken the lives of 3 innocent people because of my choices. A 5-year-old boy will never celebrate his 6th birthday, and 7-year-old girls will never turn 8. Their mother will not have a 3rd child, and I have robbed an unborn baby of its first breath. This woman may never hear the words, 'I love you' again to my family. I am deeply sorry for the pain I have caused. My remorse is profound and heartfelt." In 2019, Daniel LaPlante applied for parole again, but the authorities was decided that his request would not be reviewed until 2032. Many believe that Daniel lacks the capacity for remorse or any genuine feelings, and they see him as someone who is capable of psychological torment and brutal killings. This raises concerns that if he is released, he may seek out new victims. Friends, welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Maria Luisa Cedeno. On July 18, 2020, Maria Luisa Cedeno arrived at the Lamb Mission Inn Hotel in Manuel Antonio, in the Costa Rican province of Puntarenas. She was traveling with her little dog named Mafalda, it she treated like a daughter. The first day passed without incident. Maria Luisa went to the beach, had lunch at a restaurant, and drank some alcohol, activities common for tourists. However, the following day, everything changed. At 4:30 p.m. sharp, Maria requested that a bottle of wine, mineral water, and 2 glasses be brought to her room. It's worth noting that she didn't mention being with anyone, and everyone around her was convinced that she wanted to rest alone. Throughout the entire afternoon and night, no movement was recorded in her room. On July 20th, the hotel staff tried to contact her, but they received no response. A staff member had previously spoken with Maria, who mentioned that she lived alone because she had recently separated from her boyfriend, was not feeling well, and was only traveling with her small dog, Mafalda. Since several months had passed since the official start of the pandemic, Maria said that this had also affected her mental health, which was deteriorating. Considering everything she had been through, she said she needed a vacation. Therefore, the hotel staff decided to enter the room to check regularly in case of any unforeseen circumstances. The front door was locked from the inside, so they looked for another way in and checked the door leading to the patio. This room had an emergency exit for guests with pets. They had previously opened the patio door so the dog could go outside. When the staff approached this exit, they found the door half open. Upon entering, they were hit by a terrible odor and saw blood stains throughout the room. The dog was alive, trembling in a corner and avoiding the staff, likely due to trauma or fear. The lifeless body of Maria was found lying motionless on the bed, wrapped in a sheet. Maria Luisa Cedeno was a highly respected anesthesiologist. At 43, she led the Department of Anesthesiology and Rehabilitation at Cima Hospital in Escazú. Her colleagues admired her greatly, and during the early pandemic, she was notably committed to helping patients in need. As a medical professional, she provided significant support to her loved ones, arranging health insurance, assisting with medical appointments. Maria's parents lived in San Carlos, which made it difficult for her to be with her family all the time. Friends described her as a strong, intelligent, and likable woman who loved traveling both within Costa Rica and internationally. Her reputation was impeccable. The news of Maria's death was a tremendous shock to her family and Costa Rica. People were left asking, who would want to harm someone like Maria? From the moment the hotel staff discovered the lifeless Maria body, the mysteries of this case began. The crime scene is confusing, not only because of the brutality Maria endured, but also because of the mysteries that arise as soon as they enter the hotel room she rented. Like most hotels worldwide, this hotel keeps a record of the magnetic keys used for the rooms. This means that each time a room is accessed, the card used is recorded, and the key's code is identified. This system allows they to determine whether the person accessing the room was a guest or a hotel employee. In Maria's murder, there was no record of any other keys being used other than hers. Maria had entered her room alone the previous night, with no one else entering through the main door. However, the room had a sliding glass door at the back that could be used as an alternative entry point. Since this door could only be locked from the inside, it is possible that Maria left the door unlocked, either intentionally letting someone in or accidentally leaving the door open. This allowed someone to enter and commit the murder. As the door didn't have an electronic lock system, there was no record of anyone entering or exiting through it. This was considered the most logical explanation at the time. After discovering Maria's body, hotel staff immediately contacted the police. Upon examining the scene, it was clear that she had been brutally murdered. Her body showed severe damage, indicating that she had been tortured by someone who was extremely enraged. Forensic experts collected evidence and analyzed every detail to determine the cause of death and identify the perpetrator. The authorities recommended a closed casket at the funeral due to the extreme level of brutality inflicted upon Maria. An autopsy was later performed, which showed that the body had multiple bite marks and 2 broken fingernails, indicating that Maria attempted to defend herself. The autopsy also revealed that the killer cleaned the she-body after the murder. According to the investigator, Maria was killed in the bedroom, as evidenced by the large amount of blood found on the bed. The killer then moved the body to the bathroom, washed and dried it, wrapped it in a sheet, and placed it back on the bed. Although the killer attempted to wash the Maria body to eliminate evidence, this proved nearly impossible due to the extensive presence of blood throughout the room. Blood stains were found on the floor, walls, curtains, and bed, indicating the brutality of the attack. The forensic experts took photographs and collected as much physical evidence as possible from the scene. The body was then sent for an autopsy, and the police started interviewing the hotel staff and guests who may have witnessed or heard something. Given the state of the crime scene, it is likely that Maria screamed violently and her dog barked loudly during the attack. However, no one reported hearing any screams throughout the night. The hotel was relatively empty, but there were still a few people working at the hotel, and the hotel owner, Harry Bowden, who lived there with his husband Dano, were also present there. Additionally, Harry had allowed some acquaintances to stay at the hotel due to their financial difficulties. A bottle of wine and 2 glasses were found in Maria's hotel room. The wine had been ordered from room service. Later, investigators examined Maria's cell phone and found that she had sent a photo of the 2 glasses to a friend. However, the message did not indicate that she was with someone or she was waiting for someone to come to her room. She also sent an audio message to the same friend describing the hotel's all-inclusive package and its benefits. Maria seemed pleased with the service, mentioning that staff would bring her drinks, fruit, and other treats. She also mentioned interacting with hotel staff, including the bartender and hotelier's assistant, and noted that the owner was Dutch. Although she acknowledged the hotel is a bit worn out and understaffed, she expressed her overall satisfaction with her stay. The room cost 155,000 colons per night. Authorities investigating Maria's murder spoke with her friends and relatives to identify suspect. They discovered that she often ordered 2 glasses, even when alone, to have one for alcohol and one for water. This suggested she wasn't waiting for anyone at the time of the attack. The investigation revisited the initial theory. The attacker must have been someone who saw Maria in the hotel, noticed the back door was open and attacked her. However, the extreme brutality of the crime suggests that the killer had deep hatred and anger towards the victim, and often the killer knew the victim. Even so, there is no evidence that Maria was with anyone or had enemies at the time of her death. The autopsy revealed additional details about Maria's death, including signs of strangulation, blows to her face, arms, and chest, and evidence of abuse. After analyzing the autopsy results, conducting interviews with family, friends, and hotel staff, authorities concluded that the attack was likely carried out by multiple individuals. This theory was based on the fact that there were no reports of Maria screaming during the attack. Authorities believed that at least 2 attackers were involved, and they took complete control of Maria. Some investigators even suggested that a 3rd person may have been involved, as the victim showed signs of abuse. According to this theory, 2 assailants held Maria Luisa down and a 3rd raped her. All of this is evidenced by the fact that when her body was analyzed, there was no sign of rope or anything to indicate that she was tied up. Police speculated that the men may have stuffed something into Maria's mouth to stop her from screaming or to prevent her screams from being heard, in order to carry out the attack undetected. The cause of death was determined to be a head injury, which could have occurred in several ways. It might have been caused by a violent blow to the head, by being undressed, as there was evidence of fractured vertebrae, or by being hit with an object or falling heavily to the floor. Overall, what the assailants did to Maria was an atrocity, and without clear motivation. The first suspect was quickly identified because this man, who was staying at the hotel, had numerous fresh wounds resembling scratches and blows, suggesting he had been defending himself. Upon investigation, it was revealed to be Teodoro Herrera Martinez, an exotic dancer working in the city's nightclubs and staying at the hotel at the time of the murder. Teodoro was arrested when authorities were looking for evidence that he was involved in the murder. The man's footprints were compared to those at the crime scene. 2 matching prints were found on the black ceramic tile floor in front of the bed in the bedroom. A short time later, a second suspect named Luis Carlos Miranda was arrested. A hotel security guard had seen him walking in the hallways at night with Teodoro. Because Torreira was already in custody, Luis needed to be questioned to check for any links to the case. Additionally, tests revealed that his dental records matched the bite marks on Maria's body. Hotel employees testified that they saw Maria talking to Luis and, on one occasion, to Teodoro. However, their interactions were casual, like simple greetings, rather than those of acquaintances or friends. This might be because there were very few guests at the hotel, so they may have passed each other many times. Earlier, the hotel owner allowed 2 friends, Luis and Teodoro, to stay on the property due to financial difficulties. The police decided to question the owner of the hotel, Harry Bowden, after finding matching footprints and bite marks from the 2 suspects, Luis and Teodoro. During questioning, Harry revealed that on the night of the murder, July 19, 2020, he and husband were having dinner in their apartment within the hotel with Luis and Teodoro. After dinner, the 4 men went to a private pool. Harry also disclosed that Luis and Teodoro worked for him in exchange for accommodation. Luis managed the website and marketing, while Teodoro worked as a cook and bartender. The hotel owners and Luis and Teodoro were not close friends initially, but after moving into the hotel a year before the murder, they started spending more time together, going out for meals and socializing. And thus, the 4 men became friends. Although Harry cooperated by giving an interview in August 2020, but he was arrested because bite marks found on Maria's body matched his dental records, which began to reveal the truth. The police confiscated the phones of all the detainees and found text messages between Luis and Harry that turned out to be very compromising. In these messages, Luis invited Harry to have an intimate relationship with a woman he had been following. This exchange happened several days before the incident. However, Luis and Harry claimed that the messages didn't mean anything and that they were just joking, but that, along with the physical evidence, was enough for the authorities to keep them in jail while the case was being put together. The only person not arrested was Harry's husband. Because there was no evidence against him, no text messages, no fingerprints, and the bite marks didn't match those on Maria's body. Luis, Harry, and Teodoro's defense argued that the bite mark evidence was inconclusive and that none of them were involved in the murder. Despite this, the three men were charged with the murder of Maria. Before the trial, Harry's lawyer requested that he be released and placed under house arrest for two reasons. First, due to Harry being 69 years old, staying in jail was risky. Second, he had difficulty walking due to recent knee surgery. The defense claimed he had been using a cane for a long time, and at the trial's start, he appeared in a wheelchair. Because of this request, he was placed under house arrest and returned to the hotel where he was staying, and he couldn't leave the hotel. On September 13, 2022, the trial of Luis, Harry, and Teodoro began, where evidence against them was presented. The prosecution struggled to prove the involvement of Harry and Luis. They had text messages and bite marks on Maria's body as evidence. However, the bite marks couldn't definitively identify the murderer, they could only exclude suspects. All hotel employees were ruled out as suspects, but not these two, Harry and Luis. In contrast, Teodoro had the most evidence against him. There was a blood trail, and he had wounds inflicted by Maria during her self-defense, as his blood was found under her fingernails. Blood was also found on his shoes, watch, and cell phone, located in his room during the search. Given this evidence, only Teodoro Herrera Martinez was convicted and sentenced to 50 years in prison, while Harry Bowden and Luis Carlos Miranda were acquitted due to a lack of physical evidence. Many people believe that Luis and Harry were involved in the murder because the hotel security cameras mysteriously stopped working on the day it happened. This suggests that someone might have planned it. A hotel security guard was also suspected, but he and the other two individuals could not be arrested due to a lack of evidence. Strangely, the guard left for another country after the murder, even though the police asked him to attend the trial as a witness. There are several aspects of this case that suggest more people might be involved. For example, two guests told the police that the hotel experienced a power outage for many hours on the night of the murder, which may have been intentional. This could have been done to disable the security cameras and the magnetic keys. A peculiar detail is that 9 days after the murder, investigators searched Harry's private office, which may have given him enough time to destroy any evidence. They not only analyzed text messages but also looked at Luis and Harry's social media accounts, where they discovered discussions about an idea directly related to how to find Maria's body. Legally, Harry and Luis are presumed innocent. The only person in prison for this murder is Teodoro Herrera Martinez, who is awaiting a new trial to see if his sentence can be reduced. Although the case is solved, but the Maria family suspects something is being hidden. They suspect a defense or cover-up. The family reported that the authorities returned Maria's belongings soaked in blood, which they find puzzling because they wanted to preserve the evidence in case new information emerged. They are satisfied with Teodoro's conviction but not with the acquittal of Harry and Luis. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Diogo Goncalves. Albufeira, a beautiful resort town, is one of the most visited places in the Algarve region of southern Portugal. It was there, in 1999, that Diogo was born. He is the only child of a poor but hard-working family whose income mainly depended on the tourism. Diogo's parents saw him as a good son, and those who knew him described him as decent, responsible, hardworking, and reliable. He was also a very outgoing young man who loved being surrounded by friends and family. Diogo went to high school in his hometown. After graduating, he started studying computer science. To fund his education and support his family, he got a job at McDonald's in 2015 when he was just 16. At 17, while still working there, his life became miserable when his father suffered a stroke and fell into a vegetative state, as reported by the media. That same year, while Diogo and his mother were dealing with his father's health crisis, another tragedy struck. His mother, who had always supported his learning and growth, was hit by a car on her way to work at the mall, where she cleaned. The car dragged her several meters, leading to her falling into a ditch where she died from her injuries. Although the driver fled, but the police identified him and he faced trial. While he was waiting for the conviction of the person responsible for his parents' suffering, Diogo needed to be transferred to a medical unit where he received the necessary care. His maternal aunt, worried about his situation, had suggested that he move in with her. However, they had a serious disagreement, and after a few weeks, it became impossible for them to continue living together. Diogo explained what was happening to his friend, who offered him a room in his house in the Aldea neighborhood, also in Albufeira. At the time, the closeness to the friend's relatives helped Diogo feel at home. Despite his young age, Diogo demonstrated great ability to handle and overcome difficult situations with patience and optimism. In 2017, at just 18 years old, Diogo graduated with a degree in computer technology and completed a 6-month internship at Vila Vida Park, a leading 5-star hotel. His impressive work led the executives to offer him a position as a technician. In 2018, Diogo accepted the offer and left his job at a fast food restaurant chain, where he had worked for nearly a year and had become a duty manager. This thing a new chapter in his life, filled with opportunities to advance after overcoming difficult times. After working at the company for some time and anticipating better days ahead, he decided to buy a car. Diogo got along well with his co-workers, especially Maria Malvero, a 19-year-old security guard at the hotel. Maria, like Diogo, comes from a family with difficult circumstances and faces her own challenges. Her mother had mental health issues, and her father left when she was very young. She never spoke to him again. Maria, interested in martial arts, practiced karate and aspired to be a police officer. However, her application to the police academy was rejected due to her tattoo. Disappointed, she decided to study at Securinfo, a company that trains security guards in various private security fields. Diogo was interested in Maria and made his feelings known from the start, but she did not feel the same way and treated him coldly. Fabio Acosta, a close friend of Diogo, said that Diogo was deeply in love with Maria. He was so infatuated that he declined a well-paying job offer from the Sheraton hotel chain in Lisbon because he didn't want to be away from her. Additionally, he would bring her meals when she was working. Over time, they became very close, and people around them assumed they were a couple. However, there was no romantic relationship between them. Maria told Diogo she didn't want anything to do with him because she had just ended a toxic relationship with a naval officer, yet she was still giving him false hopes. Diogo never gave up hope for a future with Maria and sought opportunities to be near her and make her happy in various ways. One day, he was deeply disappointed when he saw a video on social media of Maria kissing another girl. Diogo was upset because he believed she should have told him that she wasn't interested in men and that this was why they could never be together. Fabio, Diogo's best friend, tried to reassure him by saying that girls often do this, but Diogo was not convinced. He insisted that she had lied to him and that was why she had rejected him. Despite the disappointment, Diogo and Maria stayed friends, and she continued to accept his gifts and invitations for dates. Several times, Diogo offered to walk her home, but she always said her roommate had a jealous boyfriend and she didn't want to bring another man into the apartment. As time went on, in December 2019, Diogo learned that he would finally receive compensation for his mother's death, which had occurred 3 years earlier. After receiving the payment amount of up to €70,000, Diogo decided it was time to buy a house to avoid continuing to pay rent. He shared the good news with his friend Maria, who left her job at the hotel a few weeks later. Maria stated that she could no longer stand the colleagues' comments about the relationship between her and Diogo. She also explained that she wanted to spend more time with her mother, who needed a lot of attention due to a mental illness. At that moment, there was no reason to doubt her words. However, subsequent incidents suggest that her decision to leave the hotel was motivated by dark reasons, and this is where the third character in the story, Mariana Fonseca, 20 years old, comes in. Mariana worked as a nurse at the hospital and had a dear relationship with Maria. They both lived together in Mariana's parents' house, because they still do not have enough money to have their own home where they could enjoy their relationship. When Maria discovered the substantial amount of money Diogo, she started getting closer to he. It seems Maria shared this information with Mariana, and they decide to trick Diogo in order to gain access to his bank account and steal the compensation money. After Maria repeatedly refused to date Diogo, one day, she told him she wanted to spend a romantic evening with him. This was a significant surprise for Diogo, who was overjoyed and couldn't believe his luck. After waiting for so long, he was ecstatic about finally being with the girl he loved. They planned the meeting for Friday evening, March 20th, 2020. Diogo was thrilled and didn't question why Maria had suddenly changed her mind. Maria and Mariana had different accounts of the incident that day, but here are the facts according to media reports based on official information. When Diogo entered, Maria offered him some orange juice she had brought. However, the drink contained an unexpected ingredient, diindawomethane, DIM, a drug affecting the central nervous system, with analgesic and sedative properties. Maria using the drug, which she had stolen from the hospital. Her plan was to sedate Diogo, access his banking information, and manipulate his fingers to unlock his phone. Mariana waited in a car outside while Maria executed the plan. Mariana even texted she several times to check if the drug had taken effect, as it was taking longer than expected. The situation inside the house became increasingly more tense. Diogo didn't understand what was happening and started to feel anxious. Maria then tries to calm him down by promising to show him an erotic dance, but first she has to tie him to a table. After being restrained for a few minutes, Diogo panicked and asked Maria to release him, but she became aggressive, leading to a struggle. Using her martial arts skills, she subdued Diogo by knocking him to the floor and choking him, prevent him from breathing. According to Mariana's testimony, Maria later instructed her to enter the apartment. Upon entering, Mariana found Diogo on the floor. She questioned Maria about the incident and criticized her for going beyond their plans, which was to steal his keys and take his money. Seeing Diogo unresponsive, Mariana began resuscitation efforts. When he woke up, he was extremely agitated and attempted to attack she. It seems he realized that Mariana was plotting against him, led him to try to defend himself. In response to Diogo's aggression towards Mariana, Maria intervened by grabbing him from behind, bringing him to the ground, and restraining him by squeezing his neck again. Diogo's life ended tragically at the hands of the girl he loved, Maria. His body was found in the living room of Maria and Mariana's house, where they continued with their planned robbery. They first severed his thumb and index finger to unlock his phone, access a mobile payment app, and transfer money. This process took several days because there was a limit on the amount that could be transferred each day. When he learned that Diogo had work scheduled the next day, Mariana and Maria tried to prevent his colleagues from noticing his absence, searching for him, and reporting him missing. One of Diogo's colleagues received a text from his number stating that he couldn't make it to work that day and needed someone to cover for him. Diogo's colleague, who disliked last-minute shift changes, found the request odd. Diogo asked if everything was okay and received a simple yes in response. The conversation among Diogo's co-worker and others continued throughout Friday and part of Saturday, but the unusual messages increasingly seemed uncharacteristic of him. One person receiving these messages was Diogo's supervisor. One message said that Diogo wouldn't be returning to work because he had met a woman in France and planned to move in with her. This explanation seemed odd to the supervisor because Diogo was a responsible employee and wouldn't leave his job so abruptly. To find the answer, the supervisor attempted to call Diogo but received no answer. Later, he got a message stating that Diogo was not in to talk on the phone. The supervisor responded, saying he could only feel reassured if they spoke. He wanted to hear Diogo's voice and wanted to know what was happening. Diogo's loved ones reacted to messages sent by Maria and Mariana, in which they pretended to be Diogo. This prompted they to alter their plan for explaining Diogo's sudden disappearance. They decided to make it appear as if Diogo had ended his life and planned to dismember his body to get rid of the evidence. Maria later mentioned that their actions were inspired by the TV show Dexter, featuring a forensic scientist who killed criminals and disguised his crimes by dismembering their bodies. After executing their horrific plan, Mariana and Maria placed Diogo's body in trash bags in the trunk of their car. They then went to an ATM and shopped at a mall, where they were seen hugging and laughing on security cameras. Following this, they returned to Mariana's home to begin dismembering Diogo's body. Ultimately, they put Diogo's torso in a black bag and discarded the other parts in a container. Meanwhile, Diogo's friends launched a campaign to report him as missing and reached out to the authorities. The authorities then waited the required 48 hours before officially declaring him missing. Mariana and Maria left the house, with Maria getting into Diogo's car to drive to a cliff near the Cabo de São Vicente lighthouse. Mariana followed behind in her own car. Around 2 p.m. that day, Mariana threw Diogo's torso off the cliff and abandoned his car nearby. They planned to make it seem like he had jumped voluntarily. However, instead of falling into the sea, the remains got stuck on a rock. Finally, Mariana and Maria drove together in Mariana's car for about 12 minutes, covering 7 kilometers, to the Inferno Dago waterfall in Tavira, where they disposed of the rest of Diogo's body in the water. Shortly after, Diogo's car was discovered in a parking lot near the Cabo de São Vicente lighthouse. A newspaper report stated that 2 laptops were found inside the car, led forensic police to investigate. A land and sea search was launched, leading to the discovery of a young man's torso partially covered by a black garbage bag. Meanwhile, at another location along the coast, a French couple found the young man's head at Inferno Toigo. Diogo's hands and feet were later recovered during an intensive police search. The investigators assigned to the case found the details surrounding Diogo's death unusual. They noted that he was a quiet man who don't hang out with bad people. As the police continued their investigation, they discovered that Diogo had received a significant payout following his mother's death. While examining money orders, they found that a large sum had been transferred from Diogo's account to someone named Maria. Naturally, the detectives' next move was to locate Maria to understand why she had received money from Diogo. Maria attempted to persuade the police that she killed Diogo in self-defense, claiming he was trying to abuse her. She stated that this was why she had left the hotel prior to the incident. However, a review of the text messages between Diogo and Maria, they showed that her claims were false. After Maria stopped working, she and Diogo grew close. During her initial meeting with the police, Maria insisted that she was entirely responsible for planning and carrying out the incident that led to the shooting. Maria clarified that Mariana was not involved in the crime at all. However, Mariana's account of the incident contradicted what Maria's claimed. Mariana reported that Maria to wanting to steal Diogo's money and intended to kill him. She stated that Maria's plan was to make him suffer in order to extract his bank account password. Investigators gathered enough evidence to convict both girls, Mariana and Maria, including phone records, the Diogo's cell phone, and ATM surveillance footage. Maria and Mariana were arrested on April 1, 2020, and faced court in June of that year. The judge carefully reviewed the incidents that Maria described. Maria remained steadfast in her confession and denied any involvement Mariana's. She stated that Diogo's body was in a suitcase in a car parked in the garage for 2 days, and it was there that the dismemberment took place, while Mariana's family was sleeping. After hearing Maria's detailed testimony about the incidents, the judge repeatedly asked her Mariana was during the dismemberment, as which had been done with surgical precision at the joints. All attention in the courtroom turned to the nurse, Mariana. She anticipated the questions and clarified that, since everyone was aware of her employment at the hospital, they mistakenly thought she was responsible for dismembering the corpse. She said that dismemberment could easily be done by using information on the internet. The judge imposed a detention order on both Mariana and Maria, citing that they had committed a serious crime in a creepy, calculated, reckless, and extremely brutal manner. A few months later, on February 24, 2021, the trial began. During her testimony on February 26, 2021, Maria claimed that she initially wanted revenge on Diogo because he had abused her, but did not intend to kill him. She admitted that her goal was to humiliate him and clarified that Mariana had no relationship with Diogo. Mariana and Maria attended court together but did not make eye contact during the trial. It is rumored that after the arrest and subsequent jail time, they decided to end their friendship. The trial included testimonies from several witnesses, including forensic expert Teresa Costa. She explained that the level of diphenhydramine found in Diogo's blood was much lower than expected from the 3 ampoules, suggesting that he either did not take the prescribed dose or had taken it many hours before his death. On April 27, 2021, the court delivered its verdict. Maria Malvero was convicted of several serious crimes, including aggravated murder, destroy the body, robbery, unauthorized access, fraud, carjacking, and possession of an illegal weapon. As a result, she received a 25-year prison sentence and was ordered to pay €265,000 in compensation to Diogo's father. Mariana Fonseca, on the other hand, was acquitted of murder but found guilty of destroy the body, complicity, and fraud. She received a 4-year prison sentence but was released because none of her convictions required pre-trial detention, at least until the final sentencing. The court determined that Mariana's effort to save life Diogo indicated that she did not intend to kill him. The judge based his decision on a confession from she, in which she accepted full responsibility for her actions. However, this verdict was not accepted by the Portuguese public, who viewed Mariana as equally guilty of the serious crime against Diogo alongside Maria. After the verdict, Mariana exited the courtroom through a separate exit where her father, who had attended all the hearings, was waiting. Neither of them spoke to the media. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Matthew Eapen. Sunil and Deborah got married in 1990 after meeting in medical college. Sunil, from Chicago, USA, followed his father's path and became an anesthesiologist, while Deborah worked as an ophthalmologist. Their first child, Brendan, was born in 1994, and their second child, Matthew, born May 24, 1996. They are young parents working in the medical field. They face significant challenges balancing their careers and family life. Both came from respected families with successful backgrounds in education and medicine, motivating them to achieve similar success. They lived in a prestigious area of Boston, Massachusetts, in a lovely home and were financially comfortable enough to hire a nanny. The nanny became like a family member, handling both childcare and household duties, and lived on their property. Deborah soon returned to work part-time, having completed advanced training courses during her pregnancy. Balancing her professional responsibilities with family care was difficult and stressful. The high workload placed on the nannies often led to them leaving due to stress or being dismissed if they couldn't meet the family's expectations. Before hiring 18-year-old Louise Woodward from Cheshire, Great Britain, they used to employ 3 other nannies. Louise lived with her family until she turned 18, then decided to take a gap year in the United States before continuing her education. Although she didn't have formal training, she loved children and got along well with them. She registered as a nanny and housekeeper with a recruiting agency, which helped her move to Boston and find a job. In December 1996, she started working for the Sunil family, whose youngest child, Matthew, was only 8 months old. She had no prior experience with infants, including changing diapers, and had only 3 days of training before she began her job. Louise was given the responsibility of caring for Matthew and 2 years old, Brendan, and assisting with household chores. She quickly found the workload overwhelming due to the family's busy daily routine. All this workload went against Louise's plans, as she had come to the USA seeking adventure and enjoyment, not to work without any days off. She initially thought that being a nanny would provide her with a livelihood without much responsibility. However, looking after children aged 8 months and 2 years truly requires experience, training, and a sense of responsibility. It is challenging to expect an 18-year-old to have such expertise without proper training. Despite this, Sunil and Deborah, who were desperate for help, accepted Louise since they needed a nanny housekeeper. Furthermore, her services were affordable. However, Louise's behavior did not meet the family's high standards, so they gave her a list of rules to follow. As a young nanny, she had little choice because previous failures with other families had put her at risk of being dismissed by the agency. She needed to keep her job to maintain her income. It was challenging for her to suppress her youthful, free spirit, as she preferred to walk, chat with friends, and attend parties rather than focus on work. Occasionally, she would wander around Boston and indulge in her dreams. However, she started refusing work more often, frequently asking for time off, and spending a lot of time on herself. She began taking daily walks, returning late in the evening, regularly attending parties, and struggling to wake up in the morning, often sleeping until nearly lunchtime. This behavior disappointed the Epens, as she would spend hours chatting with her family in the UK, neglecting her responsibilities with the children. One day, Deborah came home from work earlier than usual and found the children sleeping at home alone without any supervision. Later, the nanny Louise returned from a party. There were suspicions that similar incidents had occurred before. Naturally, Sunil and Deborah felt worried about their children and they were not happy with her. They spoke to her and imposed a curfew, but it didn't solve the problem. They were very unhappy with her behavior and felt they weren't getting their money's worth for services. Although they still wanted to trust her, they saw her as lazy and irresponsible. So, the relationship which she began to significantly deteriorate a few days before the unfortunate incident. She openly told Sunil that she didn't enjoy being a nanny and didn't want children because it was difficult, yet she pleaded not to be fired because she desperately needed the job. Sunil made more rules to discipline her, to get the nanny at the level they desired. On February 3, 1997, Deborah informed Louise that she could leave if anything was not to her liking. However, Louise, the nanny, resisted the idea, insisting there was no need to rush and that she was willing to accept and adhere to their new, stricter conditions. They agreed but mentioned they needed to change the children's sleep schedule by limiting sleep after 3 p.m. to prevent disrupting their nighttime rest. This change was not aimed at Louise personally but was necessary to reorganize the children's daily routine. Shortly after this, a terrible tragedy occurred. The tragedy happened just 10 weeks after Louise began her job. On February 4, 1997, Louise woke the children up in the morning after the parents left for work. She mentioned that Matthew was unusually fussy and cried a lot from the start of the day. Louise bathed him and then put him back to bed to calm him down. At 3:15 p.m., she went to wake him up from his nap and noticed he was breathing weakly and irregularly. She took him to the living room to perform CPR, but he remained unconscious. Initially, she couldn't reach Sunil and Deborah and only called 911 at 3:45 p.m. to report that Matthew, the 8-month-old, was not breathing. Louise informed the coordinator that the baby might have choked on vomit because his face was turning blue. Emergency services arrived quickly. The child was alive but in critical condition. The doctors rushed him to the children's hospital, where they found that Matthew had much more severe injuries than initially reported. Matthew, an 8-month-old baby, was found to have a 10-centimeter crack at the base of his skull, bleeding in his eyes, a hematoma between the skull and brain, and bleeding in his neck and back of the brain. He also had a broken wrist, and vomit was found in his trachea. He was urgently taken to the operating room for brain surgery and connected him to a life support machine because he was in a coma. Experienced doctors suggested that these injuries were caused by being violently shaken and hit on the head. In pediatrics, this is known as shaken baby syndrome. Babies are born with disproportionately large heads and weak neck muscles, making them vulnerable to injury when shaken. The unfixed head will dangle when shaken, causing damage to brain cell membranes and brain injury. When a baby is shaken, the brain moves back and forth inside the skull, leading to swelling and bleeding. Adults often shake babies out of frustration when they cry, not realizing it won't calm them down but will make them cry more. Continued shaking can cause severe injuries or even be fatal. Most cases occur in children up to 2 years old, but even a 4-year-old can suffer greatly from such shaking. Around 4 p.m., Deborah, Matthew's mother, noticed she had missed a call from Louise at 3:15 p.m. and also saw an urgent text message from she. Concerned, she left her patient at the hospital and called she, who explained the situation. Deborah was furious. She asked for leave from work and rushed to the hospital where Matthew was admitted. On the way, she prayed that her son would be okay. Upon arrival, she informed the doctors of her medical expertise, as she was an ophthalmologist, and asked to examine her baby. She quickly discovered severe Matthew's eye hemorrhaging. Meanwhile, the doctors alerted the police about the baby's serious injuries, prompting law enforcement to visit the Epen family home to question the nanny. Louise was at home, looking upset and concerned, with Brendan. She explained that Matthew had been irritable and difficult since the morning, and despite her efforts to calm him, nothing worked. By the end of the conversation, she confessed to possibly being a bit harsh with him. Overwhelmed by his continuous crying and screaming, she shook him to try to soothe him, but it was ineffective. In frustration, she threw him onto a pile of towels on the bed. While taking him to the bathroom, she accidentally dropped him, which caused him to hit his head on the floor. Her account was alarming, given the severity of Matthew's injuries. The following day, the police arrested Louise on charges of assaulting a child. Matthew's condition was not improving, and doctors were sure he had no hope of recovery. The brain injury was so severe that, even if he survived, he would be paralyzed for life. Sunil and Deborah, who were also medically educated, understood this. On February 9, 1997, they made the difficult decision to disconnect Matthew from life support, worsening Louise's situation as she was accused of murder. She was denied bail before the trial, but continued to insist on her innocence, maintaining it was a tragic accident. Before the trial on May 7, 1997, Louise agreed to take a polygraph test. During the test, she was asked if she had caused physical harm to Matthew on that day. She denied causing any injury, and a lie detector expert concluded her answers were truthful with 95% confidence. Another expert, hired by her lawyers, also confirmed that she answered all questions truthfully. On October 7, 1997, a trial began in Cambridge, Massachusetts, involving many medical experts, including neurosurgeons, pediatricians, ophthalmologists, and pathologists, all of whom were familiar with similar crimes. In the courtroom, there was extensive discussion about Matthew's injuries and Louise's behavior. Most experts believed that his injuries were caused by abuse and violence. Many doubted Louise's statement that she had accidentally hit the boy's head, noting that the injuries showed signs of blunt force trauma. The child had probably been severely and brutally beaten, and the injuries appeared fresh. An expert for the prosecution initially compared Matthew's injury to those from a fall from the second floor, but this statement was later withdrawn. The defense argued that Matthew's head and wrist injuries occurred weeks prior to the incident, before the nanny was in their home. The lawyer suggested that the child's parents, Sunil and Deborah, could have been involved in neglect or abuse. In court, Louise stated that she had not noticed any injuries to Matthew's head or arm. She explained that her interaction with the child was mild, but it caused the reopening of an old injury, leading to bleeding. She mentioned that the day before the tragic incident, the child fell near the stairs and hurt himself, which might have aggravated the injury. Louise clarified that her use of British English was misunderstood. When she said popped, she meant she placed the child on the bed. Not threw him, as might be interpreted in American English, and she denied dropping the baby in the bathtub. The defense argued that if the prosecution's claim of cruel treatment were true, Matthew would have had serious bruises and hematomas on the head and body, which were not present. This suggests that the child might have been shaken to calm him down, but not to the extent the prosecution claimed. Louise, in an emotional outburst, lost control and shook the child, causing old injuries to resurface. Witnesses and experts testified that there was no fresh bleeding in the brain, indicating that the skull fracture was an older injury. However, Sunil and Deborah denied that Matthew had suffered such a traumatic brain injury. The defense suggested that these actions might have been driven by fear, as Louise panicked while trying to revive the child. Unfortunately, Brendan could not testify at the trial because he was too young to understand what had happened. During the trial, Louise acted inappropriately. She occasionally smirked and laughed, which was attributed to nervous shock. At the time, she was reportedly only 18 years old, and the incident described triggered such a reaction. Additionally, she retracted her initial testimony obtained by detectives during the first interview. She did not mention how challenging it was to work for the Eapen family, who overwhelmed her with childcare and household duties, for which she was unprepared. She had come to the United States to relax and have fun. Despite this, she insisted that she never mistreated the children. She claimed she would never harm a child, especially to the extent of causing serious injuries that led to a coma and could paralyze an 8-month-old baby. Louise's relatives from the UK spoke at the trial, praising her as a gentle and reserved person. They described her as an obedient parishioner of a local church, a vegetarian, and a clarinet player. However, her friends from the US had a different view, seeing her as a party girl who never missed a chance to go out. 3 of her friends testified at the trial, as well as former employers who had let her go due to incompetence and irresponsibility. The prosecution highlighted that she tried to wake Matthew 15 to 20 times but found the boy wasn't breathing. She attempted to help him and called his parents, but they didn't answer. It took her half an hour to finally call 911. The prosecutor questioned why she delayed calling for emergency help when immediate action was needed. She explained that she was panicking and stressed, trying hard to manage the situation on her own. Throughout the trial, Louise showed little emotion. She occasionally smiled but never expressed regret for what happened. She spoke fondly of Brendan and Matthew, she describing Brendan as smart and talkative, and Matthew as a sweet, smiling, and playful child. The trial was broadcast live on British television, capturing the attention of almost the entire country, with many people supporting she. On October 30, 1997, a jury found Louise Woodward guilty of second-degree murder. She begged the judge to lighten her sentence. She begged them not to let her spend the rest of her life in prison for something she didn't do. However, the judge ignored her pleas. Louise was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Upon hearing the sentence, she burst into tears, unable to believe what was happening. She questioned the judge, insisting that she hadn't done anything wrong and sincerely hoped for an acquittal. Her mother supported her, stating in court that a terrible judicial error had occurred. She argued that her daughter could not have harmed a defenseless child and that she was innocent and did not deserve such a harsh punishment. In fact, the jury's opinions were mixed. Many people believe that Louise is innocent in Matthew's death, attributing it to an old injury. However, after further deliberation, the jury concluded she was guilty. It later emerged that those who initially supported acquittal were persuaded to vote guilty. This thing sparked significant public outcry in both the United States and Louise's home country, Britain. Many people in the UK donated funds to assist Louise and her family, totaling about $500,000. Additionally, there were mass protests from supporters who believed Louise was an innocent victim of the US legal system. This public pressure led to the conviction being overturned by the judge 10 days later. By then, Louise had already spent about 8 months in prison. After reviewing the case materials, the new judge concluded that Louise's actions were due to her inexperience and immaturity, not malicious intent, and that murder was not her purpose. Louise was sentenced to the time she had already spent in prison awaiting trial, which was 289 days, allowing her to be immediately released. Her supporters celebrated her release like a holiday. Meanwhile, the death of Matthew, the 8-month-old child, was largely overlooked. Even if his death wasn't her fault, his parents sought justice for their child, and the prosecutor was determined to see Louise imprisoned for a longer period. He noted that he had recently been involved in a trial where a father was accused of killing a child in a similar case, and that father remained in prison. He questioned why Louise, a nanny, was released, viewing it as unfair and contradictory given the prevalence of similar cases in U.S. judicial practice. Louise was released from prison after serving less time than it took. She returned to her hometown in the UK in 1998 and enrolled in the Faculty of Law at London South Bank University. She explained that her interest in law developed during the trial, as she engaged deeply with legal matters to better understand the proceedings. Thus, choosing law as a profession felt natural and obvious to her. While pursuing her studies, Louise decided to fulfill another dream, learning to dance. She took salsa lessons and later opened her own dance school, becoming a dance instructor. Her classes included children, often accompanied by their mothers, who were comfortable with her past and aware of the accusations against her. In 2002, Louise graduated with honors from university and began working as a lawyer. However, a year later, she left her law firm to return to her dance studio. She then married businessman Anthony Elkis, who worked in cargo transportation, and they had a daughter. By 2014, Louise had authored several books and participated in numerous interviews about past incident. In all interviews, she has insisted that she was wrongly accused of Matthew's death. She insisted she had no intention to harm and believed her arrest was unjust. She remarked that the U.S. judicial system often demands accountability, suggesting that if the parents weren't blamed, the suspicion fell on her. Still, She expressed relief and gratitude that the judicial system ultimately resolved the case, leading to her release. Louise, now 45 years old, continues to live a normal life without feeling guilty about the past, and many people support her in this. In one of her interviews, she stated that she had the right to enjoy her life. Meanwhile, the parents of Matthew, Deborah, and Sunil faced public outrage. People criticized them for prioritizing their careers over spending time with their children, questioning why they hired an inexperienced young nanny who was not equipped to care for small children. Despite knowing this, they were attracted because the cost of hiring her would be very low and burdened her with excessive responsibilities. The 18-year-old nanny, Louise, received only 3 days of training before being overwhelmed with numerous restrictions and rules. Due to public pressure, the Epen family had to relocate to a new, undisclosed address. It is known that they now have 2 more children and no longer hire nannies, with Deborah taking on the responsibility of raising the children herself. They established the Matthew Epen Foundation at Boston Children's Hospital to enhance child safety and well-being by educating the public about the dangers of shaking a baby and providing support to victims and their families. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Catherine Gowing. Catherine Gowing was a 37-year-old veterinarian from Ireland who had a passion for traveling and nature. One of her favorite places was the outskirts of Wales in the UK. Mold, a small town in North Wales with a population of around 10,000, is known for its restaurants, pubs, markets, and shops. It was in this town that Catherine lived. Born in 1975 into a large farming family, she was one of the youngest daughters. Her father dedicated his life to agriculture while her mother worked as a teacher. Throughout the long summer holidays, the family would work together on the farm, cultivating a strong work ethic in their children. As a result, the children eagerly participated in farming activities from an early age. Catherine always dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, so she loved working with the animals on her father's farm. The beautiful countryside captivated her, deepening her affection for rural life. Moving to Mold aligned perfectly with her desires. Catherine dedicated herself to her studies, graduating from St. Brandon's High School and then attending community college in Barry. Not only was Catherine a dedicated student, but she also excelled academically, particularly in the natural sciences, where she ranked 3rd in the country based on her exam results. This achievement led many to believe she had a promising future ahead. After completing her secondary education, she pursued her dream of studying veterinary medicine at the University of Budapest in Hungary. At university, Catherine formed a close group of friends, including Jane Doyle, an older friend from Ireland. They shared a deep understanding. Together, they spent their free time studying, relaxing, and attending social events, all while pursuing their shared passion for veterinary medicine. After graduating as a vet, Jane found a job at a veterinary clinic in Mold, North Wales, and moved there. She then recommended Catherine for a vacancy when it became available. From the moment of interview, the clinic staff were attracted to Catherine. With her cheerful, positive attitude and high level of expertise, she demonstrated a strong passion for working with animals, winning the trust of everyone. Catherine was an outstanding psychologist, which allowed her to connect easily with the owners of her animal patients. These qualities quickly made her one of the most popular veterinarians in the city. The girls fell in love with their new environment, but since they didn't own any property, the veterinary clinic provided their accommodation, which they weren't particularly fond of. To reduce expenses, they decided to rent a house together in a nearby village called New Brighton, just a 10-minute drive from work. The year 2012 marked the peak of Catherine's and Jane's lives. At that time, Catherine was 37 years old and had been working at the veterinary clinic for a year and a half, building a strong reputation. She was attractive and charming, and her soft Irish accent attracted many men. However, she wasn't interested in starting a family yet and remained focused on her work with animals. Even when she agreed to go on dates, those relationships usually didn't last long. In October, Jane planned a weekend trip to visit her family and asked Catherine to cover her shifts at work for a few days. Jane expressed that she not only wanted to visit Ireland but was also considering the possibility of moving back permanently to care for her elderly parents. Understanding this need, Catherine agreed to help. On October 12, 2012, the day Jane was set to leave, Catherine finished her work shift at 8 p.m. as usual. She then went to a nearby store to do some shopping. CCTV footage captured her at the store entrance at 8:06 p.m. At that time, Catherine was wearing blue jeans and a brown zip-up jacket, and she carried a bright brown bag across her body. She spent about 30 minutes shopping in the store. After she was seen on camera in different departments, she was recorded again as she left, carrying a plastic bag and a pizza box. This was the last sighting of her. Since the woman lived alone, her disappearance went unnoticed at first. The following Sunday, October 14th, Catherine was scheduled to meet a work colleague for lunch, but she never contacted him. She didn't show up and ignored his attempts to reach her. This worried her friend, who had known Catherine for a long time and found her sudden silence unusual. Initially, a coworker assumed that Catherine was just sick and resting at home. The situation became urgent when Jane returned from Ireland on Sunday evening and discovered that Catherine was not home. Her car was also missing, and strangely the front door was unlocked. Jane searched the house for any signs of her friend's location but found nothing. Catherine wasn't answering her calls, and the house was filled with a strong smell of cleaning products, which struck Jane as odd. She also noticed that Catherine's personal items, like her car keys, handbag, wallet, and mobile phone, were missing. Jane assumed that Catherine had gone home for the weekend as planned. Exhausted, Jane went to bed despite not having slept well and knowing she needed to wake up early for her shift. She felt confident that Catherine would reach out to her in the morning, and perhaps they would see each other at the veterinary clinic where Jane worked. Jane woke up and looked around her house again, but there was still no sign of her friend. Her calls and messages to Catherine went unanswered. She then went to work, hoping to find her there, but Catherine didn't show up at the clinic. Instead of being angry about her absence, the clinic management was worried. They knew she hadn't been in touch since Friday when she left work. During that time, a few people received a brief text message from her, which surprised everyone because it didn't sound like her usual style. These messages were never shared publicly. Concerned for her safety, the employees decided to contact the police. Jane spent the entire day trying to reach Catherine, but her calls went unanswered. After finishing work, she went directly to the police station to report Catherine's disappearance. She shared details about Catherine's recent life, which helped the police eliminate her as a suspect. Jane also mentioned that Catherine's car was missing, which could potentially provide a clue to the investigation. The police quickly began their investigation by interviewing Catherine's friends and acquaintances. Everyone commented on her sense of responsibility, never changing her plans without informing someone. This raised concerns that something terrible might have happened to her. Police obtained surveillance camera footage that showed the Catherine's movements from the veterinary clinic to a nearby store. After she left the parking lot, her trail went cold, making it impossible to track her any further. Catherine's parents, who live in Ireland, were promptly informed of the situation. They mentioned that their daughter had not visited them over the weekend and that they hadn't seen or heard from her in several days. Catherine's sister-in-law flew in from Wales to assist the police in the investigation and the search for Catherine. Immediately, they turned to the public through the media to gather any information about her. Unfortunately, no useful information was received. No information was received until October 16th. During this time, police believed that the Catherine might have been a victim of a crime. While no blood stains were found, but police did discover fresh male DNA on her bed linen during an inspection of the victim's house. They also found a piece of cloth tied around the bedpost. It appeared that someone had come to see her while her friend was away, tied her up, and then had an intimate encounter with her. Forensic experts discovered evidence at the scene and sent it to the lab for analysis. On the evening of October 14th, while Jane was trying to contact Catherine, she received a call from Clive Sharp, Catherine's then 40-year-old boyfriend. They had argued shortly before Catherine went missing. And now Clive wanted to attract Jane's attention and buy her a present. However, Jane did not answer his phone. Before this incident, Catherine and Clive had been dating for several months. Clive, who worked as a sales consultant, lived about 150 kilometers away from Jane and Catherine's home. Despite the distance, he frequently visited them. Catherine met Clive through a dating app, and Jane was already acquainted with him. Clive often spent time at their house, but Catherine felt uncomfortable around him and preferred to leave whenever he arrived. This information reached the police, prompting them to investigate Clive's background more closely. The day after Catherine was reported missing, the police arrested Clive Sharp on suspicion of her murder. At that point, however, the investigation lacked both Catherine's body and any concrete evidence against him. Charges could not be brought against the man, so police couldn't detain him for long without evidence. However, they did obtain permission to search his car and collected material for DNA analysis, which was sent for examination. At the same time, police gathered information on the main suspect in the veterinarian's disappearance. At the same time, the police gathered information about Clive. They checked his police record. Clive has a criminal record. Despite his charming appearance, he spent 14 years in prison. His crimes were mainly sexual assault. He was first convicted of such acts at the age of 16, when he sent obscene letters and was aggressive towards a number of girls. At 17, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for rape after attacking a 15-year-old girl and threatening her with a piece of glass. After his release, it seems that Clive tried to turn his life around. He went into hiding for a while, got married, and had a daughter with his wife, Gillian. For many years, he remained off the radar of police and was not involved in any reported crimes. However, his attempts to build a normal family life did not last long. Gillian died of drug addiction. This may have had a huge impact on him. In 1995, at 26, Clive was imprisoned again for sexually assaulting his friend's wife, receiving a 5-year sentence. Just a few months after his release, he was incarcerated once more, this time for a more serious crime. He attacked a woman, bound her, raped her, and threatened her with a knife, resulting in an 8-year sentence. Remarkably, he was granted parole after serving just 5 years. In 2003, he was released and remarried. By 2011, he had ended a previous relationship and was now in a tense relationship with his girlfriend, Catherine Gowing, who had gone missing. The police found this suspicious coincidence. As a result, Clive Sharp became the prime suspect and was arrested. While in prison, he attended a specialist program designed to help sex offenders control their urges. In this program, he publicly detailed his disturbing behavior, including tying up women and threatening them. After committing the violence, he envisions 2 outcomes. He will lose interest and release the victim, or he will fantasize about killing them, envisioning scenarios in which he strangles or drowns them. The program was discontinued in 2017 after convincing evidence that it did not help solve the problem of sex offenders. While in prison, Clive claimed he had an alibi for the time when Catherine disappeared, saying he was visiting relatives. Interestingly, his daughter and her stepfather supported his claim, stating they saw him that weekend and he appeared calm. However, this did not rule out the possibility that Clive could have harmed Catherine. He could have attacked her, disposed of her body, and then gone to visit his relatives. The police examined this information for inconsistencies in Clive's story and increased their scrutiny. They soon discovered that Clive Sharp was lying. DNA test results from Catherine's bed showed a 100% match with samples taken from Clive. This indicated that he had sexual intercourse with Catherine. No one believed that the encounter was consensual. Catherine had disliked Clive and actively avoided any communication with him. The search for Catherine continued, but hopes of her safe return were slim, especially after Clive revealed he had violent fantasies. Just 2 days later, a couple walking near the abandoned Pin Flame Quarry, just a few miles from Catherine's home, discovered the burned-out car. They quickly called the police. Although the car was badly damaged, the police were quick to confirm that it belonged to Catherine. By this time, news of Catherine's murder had spread throughout the community. However, no body was found in the car, and no further evidence of what had happened had emerged. As a result, many had given up hope of finding Catherine alive. Meanwhile, Clive Sharp continued to deny any involvement in her disappearance. On October 19th, the prosecutor's office concluded that they had enough evidence to charge him with Catherine's murder. Even without a body, preparations began for a long and contentious trial, with the prosecution attempting to gather all available evidence. The investigation into Clive's guilt and the search for her body is ongoing near Catherine's home, where her burnt-out car was discovered. The search involves police, volunteers, helicopters, dogs and divers who have checked all the nearby waters. On January 7, 2013, Clive had not confessed to the murder. However, the search did not last long, as divers soon found human remains in a lake near a quarry, close to the location of the burned car. Dismembered body parts were found in the reservoir, approximately 3 kilometers away. All of the remains were sent to a laboratory for testing. Experts determined that the body parts belonged to Catherine. Unfortunately, as some body parts were missing, the cause of death could not be determined. After an extensive search of the reservoir, no further remains were found. The parts that were found were sent back to Ireland for Catherine's family. Catherine's funeral was held in County Offaly, Ireland, where her family received support. Clive Sharp's trial began on January 14, 2013. Unexpectedly, he confessed to his crimes at the outset of the trial, on the advice of his lawyer, which significantly accelerated the proceedings. However, this was not because he felt remorse, but because he had little choice, as the prosecution had overwhelming evidence against him, including DNA and the cloth used to bind the victim. While the prosecution presented a detailed account of the harrowing events, the Clive remained evasive and did not fully explain what transpired in the house. According to the prosecutor, on October 12, 2012, Clive broke into Catherine's home while she was alone. He monitored her until she went to bed, then entered the house and attacked her in the bedroom, restraining her to the bed. It is believed he covered her mouth to stop her screaming for help before raping her repeatedly and eventually strangling her. After the attack, Clive went to buy cleaning supplies. He was captured on surveillance cameras at the store where Catherine had been seen alive the previous day. He bought garbage bags, cleaning products, a can of gasoline, and a Halloween mask from a nearby construction store. He also acquired a hacksaw and some blades. Upon returning to Catherine's house, he began to dismember her body, packing the pieces into bags and loading them into his car. He then cleaned the crime scene meticulously, making it impossible for forensic scientists to determine where he had dismembered her. He disposed of the remains in the water and destroyed all her belongings, including her car, which he soaked with gasoline and set on fire. To cover up his actions, Clive sold his old car and bought a new one the very next day. He boasted about this new car to Jane, while she was trying to learn what had happened to Catherine. The old car was located, and the police obtained a search warrant. During the search, they discovered fabric that matched the material used to restrain the Catherine, along with blood stains and Clive's DNA. Additionally, geolocation data from his mobile phone confirmed that Clive was near the lake and at the location where the burnt car was found right after the crime. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Clive refused to speak about the crime during the investigation. Another shocking detail emerged. The intended victim of Clive that night may have been another woman for whom he also had feelings. He tried to break into her house around 10 p.m. on the same night he attacked Catherine. Although they had been involved previously, she ended the relationship due to his rude behavior. When Clive tried to tie her up and harm her, she told him to stop and leave, which he complied with. Clive drove to Catherine's house to fulfill his disturbing desire. Around midnight, he parked nearby where he could see her house clearly. Recorded on CCTV, he waited until about an hour after she went to bed before taking action. After the attack, he returned to his car and spent an hour and a half reflecting on what he had done. He went back to Catherine's house around 3 a.m., knowing she was alone and using a key that Jane had given him, which eliminated any barriers. During the trial, Clive confessed but offered few new details. He kept his head down and avoided looking at the prosecution or Catherine's family. Ultimately, Clive Sharp was found guilty of murdering Catherine Gowing. The prosecution requested a minimum sentence of 42 years, but due to his guilty plea, this was reduced to 37 years. A monument to Catherine was later built in the Catholic Church in Buckley, funded by employees of the veterinary clinic where she worked. A year and a half after the crime, Catherine's friend Jane was still deeply affected following Catherine's death. Jane left her job at the veterinary clinic and moved to northwest England to start over. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Sandra Garner. Sandra and John met in the 1990s in the small town of Paris, Texas, which has a population of around 20,000. They worked together at a packaging company and quickly formed a close relationship, which developed into a romantic relationship. Sandra is 13 years older than John and has been through a divorce. She has 2 children from that marriage, Wes and Andrea. Although they appeared happy, their relationship faced many difficulties from the beginning. After dating for 2 years, they decided to get married. John became stepfather to Sandra's children, Wes and Andrea, and is also a husband who deeply loves his wife. They were married on January 1, 2000, in Las Vegas. John appears to be a friendly and sociable person, well-liked by most people. However, those who knew him closely were aware of his struggles with alcohol. When he drank, he sometimes lost control and became aggressive. Additionally, he dealt with mental health issues and was on antidepressants. John worked as the HR manager, responsible for hiring and firing employees. He especially enjoys firing people, which leads many to think that he enjoys the power he has over others. Overall, John was a caring person who loved his family. After the wedding, his life seemed to get better, thanks to the sincere love between him and his wife, Sandra. They felt very compatible and quickly got along with their children, especially little Wes. However, Andrea did not like John, her stepfather. This is a normal psychological reaction of most children when they do not want to accept their parents' new partner, and it usually requires time to adapt. In 2014, Sandra started experiencing health issues and was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, which greatly complicated her daily life. This has changed their family life a lot. John had to do the housework and take care of Sandra. During this time, she tried to work remotely to help out financially. He willingly supported her, helping her with daily tasks and providing emotional support. As a result, Andrea witnessed the love between her parents and began to empathize with John. The relationship between Andrea and John improved, She started helping John with more housework and taking care of Sandra. This brought their family closer. Unfortunately, Sandra's health continued to decline. She faced ongoing struggles with her illness, impacting both her physical and emotional well-being. The medication she took provided only partial relief, alleviating some symptoms but leaving her feeling emotionally suppressed. At times, she found herself searching online for ways to end her life, feeling overwhelmed by depression. During those times, she confided in John about her thoughts and expressed her worries about being a burden to him. John reassured her, saying that if she were to die, he would not want to continue living either. This conversation made Sandra realize that she could not leave her children without a parent. In that moment, John became her reason for living. As Sandra's health deteriorated, she decided to leave her job because she was unable to work, either in the office or from home. This meant that John was the only one earning money to support the family, causing further financial hardship. Even so, John showed no signs that he was stressed. He always supported his wife and children, was always by their side, and tried his best to help. In 2016, the family moved to a small town called Mai Sang, about 50 kilometers south of Taoist in Alice County. With a population of less than 1,000, Mai Sang is a friendly and cozy community. They loved it so much that they decided to buy a house there. John and Sandra have good relationships with both families. This was proven when John's relatives moved into a new house right across from theirs. They frequently organized joint events and celebrated holidays together. The backyard of John and Sandra's house became a gathering place for everyone. By this time, their children, Wes and Andrea, had moved out and were living independently. Sandra continued to battle her illness, but the family seemed to be doing fine, at least until 2018. On January 1st, they were set to celebrate their 18th wedding anniversary. They planned to have dinner at a restaurant and invited Sandra's son, Wes, to join them, while Andrea was away on a trip and could not attend. Wes arrived for the celebration and left around 7 p.m. Typically, Sandra and John went to bed early, around 9 or 10 o'clock, and that night was no exception. However, a terrible tragedy struck later that night. At around 1 o'clock in the morning, the 911 operator received a call from Sandra. She said she needed help and asked for both the police and an ambulance, as her husband John had been attacked. According to her, an intruder had entered their home, attacked her husband, and then forced her into the bathroom. There, the assailant ordered her to count to 100, threatening to kill her if she did not obey. She complied with his demands. Sandra told the dispatcher that her husband John was wheezing and likely still alive, and she requested help. The dispatcher provided instructions for performing artificial respiration, and she followed. Fishers were dispatched immediately, but it took them about 15 minutes to arrive. When they entered the house, they heard Sandra calling for help from the bedroom. There, on the floor, lay her husband, whom she had pulled from the bed to administer artificial respiration. One of the officers checked John's body. He was still warm, but showed no signs of life. It seemed he was still alive when Sandra called asking for help. Unfortunately, John did not survive until the authorities arrived. The medical team confirmed that he was dead. The officers then suspected that the attacker might still be in the house, so they conducted a thorough search but found no one else present. The killer had already escaped. Meanwhile, Sandra was in shock and began to have a hysterical reaction to the situation. As a result, she was unable to communicate with the police initially and required assistance. Medical personnel had to help calm her down, while detectives and forensic experts arrived to carefully examine the crime scene and collect evidence. Around 2 a.m., Sandra regained consciousness and was taken to the police station for questioning. The police checked to see if her hands were stained with gunpowder and determined whether she was the person who attacked John or not. Forensic experts photographed the crime scene, collected the clothes she wore before the police arrived, and interviewed an important witness who could describe the attacker. The police hoped she could provide useful information to the detectives. However, her illness made it hard for her to focus. Even so, she made an effort to assist with the investigation. Sandra explained that she and John had gone to bed together before the attack occurred. Everything happened so quickly that she didn't fully comprehend what was happening or see the attacker clearly. She was overwhelmed with fear. She recalled being awakened by a gunshot around 12:45 a.m., followed by a second shot. In the bedroom, she saw a man with a flashlight and a gun jump from the bed to the floor. She hid and screamed, hoping someone would hear her and come to help. The intruder was wearing a blue sweatshirt and jeans, a mask, and was much taller than she was. Sandra pleaded with her attacker not to kill her. He responded that he was there to take revenge on John and meant her no harm. He explained that he had been working hard at the company where John worked, but he was fired several years ago, which led to him losing his home and ruining his life. This grudge against John was the reason for his actions. Then demanded to see the safe. Sandra led him to the closet, where the reflections from the metal door allowed her to get a better look at him. She tried to get a better look at him, but he threatened to kill her if she did so. Fearful, she turned away and stopped trying to look at him. Then, he opened the safe and handed over the money, which she estimated to be around $18,000. She couldn't provide an exact figure since it had been a long time since she last counted it, but she was confident that it was $18,000. The police had no way to verify this, so they had to take her word. After taking the money, the attacker ordered her to go to the bathroom and count to 100. The interrogation lasted several hours, after which the police allowed Sandra to return home. By then, her family had gathered to support her during this difficult time. She needed them now, more than ever. She was deeply saddened by what had happened. However, some family members doubted her sincerity. Many people noticed her strange behavior immediately after she spoke to the police. She returned to her house, even though the attacker might return, as if she was not worried about the incident. In fact, Sandra seemed to be hoping the man would come back so she could attack him. Meanwhile, her family arrived at her son Wes's house and informed him that John had been killed. He was shocked and immediately went to the police station to report the incident. What was strange was that he did this before going to visit his mother. He did not even call her to ask about the situation. Later, the police understood Wes's actions. He had something important to share with them. From the very first sentence, he confirmed to the police that he believed the murder was committed by his own mother, Sandra. However, he felt very embarrassed to say this because it was difficult to give testimony against the closest relative. He was skeptical that an intruder could have entered their home unnoticed, even though his parents had 2 dogs. These dogs should have barked to warn of danger. His statements puzzled the police. During the initial interrogation, Sandra's testimony was so clear and convincing that the police had no doubts about her. However, Wes maintained that his mother could have killed John, prompting the police to consider this possibility. Police thoroughly searched the entire crime scene, including the main house and several outbuildings like a garage and a barn. In the garage, they discovered Sandra's Ford Mustang. They were looking for her self-defense pistol, which Wes mentioned was usually kept in her purse but is sometimes hidden under the seat of the vehicle. Unfortunately, they could not locate the weapon. In the house, police discovered a total of 49 pistols and 10 rifles. All of these weapons belonged to John, a gun enthusiast who did not know how to store them safely. These weapons are kept all over the house, suggesting that John wanted a gun to be ready for use in emergency situations. This indicated that he might have feared an attack from enemies. However, one notable weapon was missing from his collection, a Taurus .38 revolver registered to Sandra. It is possible that the revolver was lost, stolen, or misplaced. Additionally, a small amount of gunpowder residue was found on her hand, which could have come from accidental circumstances, such as being near her husband John when he was killed. Besides, during cardiopulmonary resuscitation, Sandra touched her husband. The amount of gunpowder residue on her hands was minimal, suggesting she might have come into contact with it after the murder. Initially, she may have had more gunpowder traces, but they may have been deleted during the move. Although this evidence was circumstantial, it was quite suspicious, leading to her becoming a suspect in her husband's murder. During the investigation, police decided to examine Sandra and John's tablets and mobile phones. These devices were confiscated to analyze their messages and internet searches. Investigators discovered that Sandra was conducting very suspicious searches, including searching for fentanyl and other powerful drugs. Even more troubling, shortly before John's death, she had searched for methods to kill someone and ways to conceal a crime. However, these searches are not enough to definitely confirm her malicious intentions, as they are mixed with normal searches. Still, they raise suspicion. On January 4, 2018, police investigated the possibility that Sandra was involved in John's murder. The only issue was that they had yet to locate her gun. Officers consulted her son, Wes. He suggested that if he were searching for the gun, he would check his mother's car. Consequently, police decided to conduct a more thorough search of the car and garage. When the detectives arrived at Sandra's house, they found that the garage was locked. They asked Wes to open the door for them, and he went to see his mother. He had asked her to give him a spare key so the police could get into the garage. However, she was visibly terrified. She insisted that she would not let the officers in, demanding that they leave immediately. All those who witnessed this gesture were shocked. Her reaction left them feeling strange. Previously, she had communicated openly with the police and was willing to help in the investigation. However, on that day, she had a very strong reaction. Initially, Sandra expressed disappointment with her relatives because they suspected her of guilt. Afterward, she left the house and went to her garage in an attempt to stop the officers from searching. However, her efforts were in vain. The police informed her that they would conduct a search, even if she did not want it. If she refused to provide the key, they would break down the door, since they had a warrant. Consequently, she had no choice but to comply and unlock the garage. When they got in, they immediately checked under the driver's seat of the Mustang. There they found a grocery bag containing a paper towel that wrapped a rusty .38 caliber revolver. This suggests that during the initial search, the weapon was hidden elsewhere, and she later returned it to its usual location. This is absolutely certain because the police team that conducted the previous search was present at the scene again. Sandra was likely very nervous and reluctant to let the police into the garage. The investigators questioned Wes again, and he claimed to have seen Sandra put the murder weapon in her car after the police had left. However, she denied this accusation. It was puzzling because she had no motive to kill her beloved husband, who had always cared for her. The detectives decided to question Sandra again, not just as a witness, but as a suspect in her husband's brutal murder. They made it clear they suspected her of the crime. They pressured her, accusing her of lying and trying to obstruct the investigation. Although she was visibly upset and denied any involvement in the crime, her emotional response seemed sincere. She confirmed that there were no weapons hidden in her car. She was emotional at the time and could not provide any further information. Experts analyzed the flight path of the bullet from the gun used in the case. They determined that the shots were fired from the revolver found in the car, and the bullets collected matched this weapon. However, no fingerprints or DNA from Sandra were found on the revolver, indicating that it could have been used by anyone. Despite this, she could still be arrested and charged, but it would take more evidence to build a full case. The police went to arrest Sandra at her home, but she was not there, so they waited for her to return. When she drove up in her car, she was surprised to find herself immediately arrested. John's family watched from the windows of a nearby house. As the police handcuffed the family members of John erupted in applause. They feel grateful that justice was finally served and believe that she was the one who shot John. Sandra was taken into custody and her bail was set at $2 million, an amount she could not afford. As a result, she remained in prison for a long time. On March 21, 2018, Sandra Garner was officially charged with the murder of her husband, John. She spent 1.5 years in prison, which took a severe toll on her health. When she appeared in court in September 2019 in Waxahachie, Texas, she looked very unwell. It seemed that the situation had drained her of her remaining energy. She appeared physically worn out and emotionally exhausted. From the outset, the prosecutor's office believed they had strong reasons and sufficient evidence to convict her. However, as the prosecution's case progressed, it became increasingly clear that Sandra might avoid punishment, as the evidence against her was largely circumstantial. One of the key witnesses in this case is Sandra's son, Wes. He actively sought to push the investigation forward, even implicating his own mother. Wes confidently claimed that the weapon should be in the car, despite the fact that investigators found it was not there previously. Typically, someone who shares such detailed information about a crime raises suspicions of their involvement. This led many to wonder, did Wes want John, his stepfather, dead? Did he orchestrate the incident to have Sandra, his sick mother, arrested instead of facing consequences himself? When investigators looked closely at Wes, they discovered several troubling issues. He was able to kill John because he had access to the entire house and knew where the gun was hidden. Investigators discovered that the suspicious online searches only occurred on nights when Wes visited his parents, John and Sandra, after they had gone to bed. Tablet searches can be traced back to Wes in the first place. He seemed determined to make his mother, Sandra, pay for this crime, and even implied that she had a weapon. Wes's alibi was highly questionable. He claimed that he was at home watching videos on his laptop at the time of the crime, but no one could verify this. He lived alone, and during the initial investigation, the police overlooked a crucial detail. His laptop was set to a different time zone. Additionally, Wes can set the video to play continuously while he is absent, meaning he had no real alibi. Furthermore, John had a motive, as he was named in John's will, and might have wanted to access his inheritance quickly. In contrast, Sandra had no reason to want John dead. John was a significant part of her life and had cared for her during her illness for many years. He is the only one who earns money to support the family, and they live in harmony and attached together. During the trial, it was highlighted that the police had failed to act professionally. It took them 15 minutes to get to the crime scene. The police who conducted the investigation that night were inexperienced, as they had never been involved in a criminal investigation before. This led to some serious mistakes. In addition, the police needed to use special bags to preserve traces of gunpowder on Sandra's hands, but they did not do so. Photos taken at the crime scene on a police officer's mobile phone were later accidentally deleted and could not be recovered. The officers also did not conduct thorough interrogations of former employees at John's workplace, although Sandra said that the killer was fired from John's company, and from then on, he developed hatred towards John. The police only conducted interviews with a few witnesses, and they prioritized questioning John's family. Consequently, the prosecutor had to address the defense's claims about the police's lack of competence. There have been numerous investigations into police misconduct, and those found to be at fault were disciplined. The prosecutor needed to clarify why the police did not collect fingerprints from the door handle of the Mustang where the revolver was discovered. Forensic experts might have found a fingerprint belonging to another suspect, the person who hid the weapon. If that person was really Wes, he could have entered the house without making the dog bark because they recognized him. However, there were uncertainties. Sandra cannot recognize her son Wes's eyes or voice. She said she felt very scared at the time, and due to her illness, it was difficult for her to concentrate. As a result, she overlooked many details and did not fully understand who she was speaking to, and Wes could have altered his voice during their conversation. During the trial, Sandra asserted that her son, Wes, was responsible for the murder of her husband, John. She noted that all evidence pointed to Wes, and he even hid her gun and tried to arrange everything to blame her. Recently, she had observed his suspicious behavior and noted that he had become distant from John, with whom they had previously been friendly. To verify her claims, a cross-examination was conducted. This process can help prove innocence, but it carries risks. Even small mistakes in her answers can sway the jury against them. She has difficulty during this interrogation process, providing inconsistent answers and leaving many gaps in her story. She believes the cause was confusion and health issues, which may have left the jury unconvinced. The prosecution presented over 400 pieces of evidence and interviewed 25 witnesses, leading them to believe that Sandra would be found guilty of her husband's murder, John. However, when it was the defense's turn, they successfully refuted the prosecution's arguments and pointed out the negligence in the investigation process. They point out that initially, Wes was not considered a suspect. There was no testing for gunpowder residue on his hands, no polygraph examination, and no thorough investigation of his alibi. When the jury began deliberating, many thought it would be a long one. However, they returned a verdict after just a few hours. In the late afternoon, when the court announced the verdict, all of Sandra's family gathered in the courtroom to hear the decision. The jury found her innocent, bringing her immense relief. Overcome with emotion, she cried and embraced her lawyers. After serving 21 months in prison, she was finally free to go home. However, this news upset her son, Wes, and John's family. They believed that she was responsible for John's death and expected her to be sentenced to prison. The relationship between John's family and Sandra's family became strained, and this eventually forced his family to move away. Now, Sandra believes that Wes was the one who killed John. Sandra's relationship with her son, Wes, has deteriorated greatly. After the trial, they completely stopped communicating. Sandra's daughter, Andrea, continues to support she and believes in her innocence. The police have not closed the case, and for a while, they focused on Wes as the main suspect in the murder. However, valuable time has been lost. Many clues were lost, and many things were not done in time. As a result, it is now nearly impossible to definitively prove anyone's guilt. Evidence related to this case has been stored for years, and no one has taken the initiative to investigate further. Hello again. True crime fans, we've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Sandra Chesky. On November 17, 1973, in Geechee, Manito, a small nature reserve in Iowa. On that day, 5 teenagers from South Dakota embarked on a trip there, planning to enjoy their Saturday together, unaware that only one of them would return alive. Sandra Chesky, born in 1960, was the youngest of 5 children. Her parents lost a son shortly after birth due to health problems. Her parents faced serious financial difficulties, which led to conflict. Eventually, the father left, leaving the mother to care for 3 sons and a daughter alone. She had to work hard to support her young children. While her mother completed her nursing studies, the children stayed with their grandparents. By the time Sandra was 18 months old, they had all lived together for 3.5 years. Life on the farm with her grandparents was difficult. Mainly due to their age, it was difficult for them to manage 4 grandchildren. so the children were often left to fend for themselves. However, the grandparents were very involved with their grandchildren, and the children grew up in a loving environment. After finishing school, the children were reunited with their mother by the time Sandra started school. Her mother had started a new relationship and invited her partner to live with her. This led to conflict in the family as the children struggled to accept their stepfather, creating a tense atmosphere. The mother wanted to build her own life, but her children felt like a hindrance. Finally, she made a difficult decision. One day, when Sandra returned home from school, she learned that she and her brother Bill were going to be placed in different foster homes. This news shocked Sandra, because she had not caused any problems and had tried to maintain good relationships with everyone in the family. Sandra felt that her mother was choosing her new partner over her children, which felt like another betrayal to her. The foster family she was placed with was dysfunctional. One day, Sandra told a social worker that her foster parents were abusive. Unfortunately, she was moved to another foster family that was also cold and uncaring. She did small chores around the house and felt like a servant. Eventually, she convinced her mother to let her return home. During this time, her brother, Bill, also returned home. He had previously lived with a police officer's family, where he learned strict discipline. The two brothers tried to behave and obey their parents, fearing that they would be sent back to foster care. However, after a while, Bill lost his temper, prompting his stepfather to send both him and Sandra to a strict boarding school in South Dakota. The rules there were harsh. When they returned home for the holidays, they begged their parents not to send them back and were filled with fear. In the summer of 1973, Sandra's family moved to a large farm outside of Sioux Falls. At the time, Sandra was just 13 years old. At a party with friends, Sandra met a boy named Roger Essam. Roger was a friend of one of Sandra's acquaintances, and after they met, they began talking and communicating regularly. Eventually, Roger asked her out on a date, and their relationship developed over time. Roger, 17, and Sandra, 13, are in a relationship. But Sandra looks older than her actual age, which is why Roger doesn't suspect her of being too young. However, Sandra is afraid of losing him and keeps her real age a secret. One day, while hanging out with Roger, Sandra meets his friend Stuart. Later, they also have another friend, Michael. The group, all of them come from respectable families and have no history of trouble with the law. Planning for the camping trip began when Roger and Michael met at school on November 16, 1973. They came up with the idea of visiting the Gitche-Manitou State Reservation in Lyon County, Iowa, where they could camp, have a campfire, and share stories. Since Stuart, the oldest of the group, had a driver's license and was allowed to drive his parents' car, they quickly agreed to go. By evening, the group knew about the plan and were looking forward to their weekend adventure. On November 17, 1973, Stuart said goodbye to her parents and set off with her younger sister Dana to meet up with the rest of their group. Meanwhile, Roger invited Sandra to join them on the trip, which she agreed to. Her brother Bill had originally planned to come along, but he canceled at the last minute. The group of 5 teenagers arrived at the park around 9 p.m. Although they were running a bit behind schedule due to the time spent gathering supplies for their hike, the conservation area was home to vast forests inhabited by deer, as well as a large river that offered numerous convenient camping spots. After exploring the area, they selected a suitable location to set up camp. As night began to fall, the teenagers lit a fire, sat around it, and sang songs together. Sandra sat next to her boyfriend, hugging him. The group was having a wonderful time, completely oblivious to the deadly dangers that the night could bring. On November 18, 1973, a young couple visited the reserve, intending to take a relaxing walk and enjoy the scenery. However, During their walk, they stumbled upon something suspicious in the distance. As the man approached, he saw two lifeless bodies lying in the tall grass. He immediately reported the discovery to a park ranger and the police. About an hour later, police arrived, and after investigating, they discovered the bodies of two teenagers who had been killed by gunfire. The victims had suffered multiple gunshot wounds to their bodies, including their backs, heads, and chests. Police determined that the victims were killed at close range, giving them little chance of survival. The severity and proximity of the wounds led police to conclude that the attack was brutal and intentional. A fire was discovered at a nearby campsite, likely started by a group of teenagers. However, upon further investigation, two more bodies were found, both victims killed by gunshots. Police quickly called in forensic experts to examine the crime scene and collect evidence. The bodies were sent to the lab for autopsies, where the victims were quickly identified. All of the victims were from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and included 15-year-old Michael Hadrath, 17-year-old Roger Essam, 18-year-old Stuart Bod, and 14-year-old Dana Bade. Stuart's sister. The news of this tragic event has left the relatives and friends of the victims in a state of shock. They were known for their calm and kind nature, focused on sports, and stayed away from any criminal activity or negative lifestyle. It seemed like they were just gathering to relax. But, unfortunately, their evening turned tragic due to the evil intentions of others. The relatives and friends of the victims cannot understand who could have committed such a heinous act or why, as the victims had no enemies or anyone who would wish them harm. Stuart's parents told police that the teens had gone to the campsite in a blue van, but the van was not found at the scene. The van's disappearance was a key clue. Forensic experts believed it could be a crucial lead in solving the case. During the autopsy, forensic experts discovered that the victims were killed with various caliber weapons, including 12, 16, and 20 caliber bullets. This led police to suspect that at least 3 people may have been involved in the massacre. The investigation had difficulty gathering valuable information about the perpetrators. The lack of evidence, including the murder weapon, the victim's car, and witness statements, hampered the case's progress. It is important to note that in the 1970s, the police did not have modern methods and technology. This may have contributed to the case's delay. However, when a police officer from the Sioux Falls station contacted the police handling the case, the police reported that a 13-year-old girl, Sandra Chesky, came to the station and shared a shocking story. According to Sandra, after arriving at the reserve, her group of friends began setting up camp. As soon as they finished, a group of people emerged from the woods. They proceeded to attack Sandra's friends with guns. Sandra chose not to resist and was taken away from the campsite by the group. Sandra was then taken out of town, where she was raped, but was eventually released. She then tried to find her friends, but was unable to find them. The next morning, Sandra tried to contact her boyfriend, Roger, but her calls went unanswered. This left Sandra worried and panicked. It was not until she arrived at the police station that she received the heartbreaking news. Police have taken Sandra's statement. They want to find out what happened on the night of the massacre, specifically what she witnessed and who was involved. Police are trying to understand the motive behind the murder of the 4 young men and why the killers spared Sandra's life. Sandra explained that she and her friends had planned to camp at the reserve the day before. However, the group was delayed, and when they arrived, a series of events took place that led to this tragic incident. The group arrived at the reserve at around 22:30, armed with a guitar and a small musical instrument set. They planned to stay there for the night and then return home. According to the Sandra, they set up camp, lit a fire, and rested around it. The teenagers planned to smoke marijuana and then go to sleep. However, Their relaxation did not last long. An hour later, they began to hear footsteps. The fire limited their vision, making it difficult for them to see what was going on around them. Then they heard a stranger yell. Roger said he was going to check. As he stood up and walked away from the campfire, a loud gunshot rang out. Roger collapsed to the ground. The group of young men immediately panicked. A second shot rang out, causing Stuart to fall to the ground next to his friend. Then came several more shots. Sandra then witnessed 3 men appear, all armed with handguns. The rest of Sandra's group quickly took cover behind trees and bushes. However, they were soon apprehended by the men, strangers who claimed to be police officers working to combat organized crime and illegal substances. The men implied that they had seen the teenagers smoking marijuana. Although they claimed to be law enforcement officers, they were not wearing police uniforms and did not display badges or identification. Sandra was very scared and complied with the criminals' demands. She did not dare to resist because she was afraid of the consequences of disobeying. On the contrary, Michael did not comply with the criminals' demands, so the men pointed their pistols at him. Michael instinctively raised his hands, but the attackers fired, seriously injuring Michael. Meanwhile, Roger and Stuart were still lying on the ground. The attackers then asked Sandra about a blue truck. Then the attackers led Michael, Donna, and Sandra toward the parking lot. After arriving at Stuart's blue van, an attacker asked Sandra to unlock the car, which she did. The attacker then got into the driver's seat and they drove away together. During the ride, the attacker talked to Sandra and assured her that her friends would be okay because the guns used were not real guns, but special tranquilizer guns that put them to sleep. Sandra found this explanation believable, thinking that her friends were simply unconscious and that they would all be reunited after everything was over. The attacker took Sandra to an abandoned house. His accomplice's car followed behind. The attacker told Sandra to stay in the car, and he got out to discuss something with the other men. One of the men then approached the car, opened the passenger door, and roughly grabbed her by the neck, pulling her out of the car. She was then brutally attacked. The attacker then got into the car and asked for Sandra's home address before dropping her off. The incident ended around 4:00 a.m. before releasing Sandra from the car. He threatened to harm her family if she told anyone about the incident. However, Sandra went to the police station to report the incident. The police were confused as to why the perpetrator released Sandra, even driving her home. Despite knowing that she could expose them to the police, Sandra was the only person who could help find the 3 killers. So she worked closely with the police. They brought in an artist to create composite sketches of the suspects based on Sandra's descriptions. However, the criminals did not mention their real names to Sandra. The attacks happened at night, making it difficult for Sandra to see their faces. Therefore, the composite sketches may not be completely reliable. The only detail Sandra could provide with certainty was a description of the perpetrator's vehicle, which was a Chevy pickup from the early 1970s. After meeting Sandra, Stuart's car was discovered near a truck stop in Sioux Falls the following day. Forensic experts conducted a thorough examination and search of the car, looking for any fingerprints or other evidence that the perpetrator may have left behind. Unfortunately, the search did not yield any valuable information to aid the investigation. Police are investigating the location of the house where the criminal took Sandra, hoping to find clues. Data shows that this abandoned building is within 70 kilometers of the city. Search teams have been mobilized to locate the house as Thanksgiving approaches. Public pressure increases, and search teams are forced to speed up the search. The presence of 3 armed criminals capable of violent crimes against children makes people feel unsafe in their own homes. Sandra also joined in the search of the abandoned house. She also made regular visits to the police station to identify potential suspects based on composite sketches Despite all their efforts, the case still hasn't yielded any leads. Sandra was placed under police guard at her home on Thanksgiving Day for her own safety, as she was the only witness who could identify the perpetrators. The police were concerned that the perpetrators might target Sandra after discovering that she had spoken to the police about them on November 29, 1973. Sandra and the police discovered the White House with broken windows. It was the house where she had been brutally raped by a stranger. Sandra suddenly ran up to one of the police officers and threw her arms around him, terrified as the horrific memories of that night came flooding back to her as she stepped back. She noticed a blue pickup truck on the road. Sandra pointed to the vehicle. Recognizing it as the one used by the criminals on the night of the massacre, the police quickly stopped the pickup truck and a man got out. He was identified as 29-year-old Alan Fryer. Sandra was horrified when she realized that this was the man who had been present at the attack. Alan was immediately arrested and taken to the police station. Alan initially denied ever having been to the sanctuary and had nothing to do with the deaths of the children in the case, claiming that he could never hurt children. However, when pressed by the police, Alan began to break down. He eventually admitted that he and 20-year-old David Fryer and 21-year-old James Fryer had indeed been to the sanctuary on the evening of the incident. Although he claimed not to have participated in the murders, he admitted that David and James had killed the children. Alan disputed Sandra's initial testimony, instead saying that the teenagers had attacked them, causing them to attack back in self-defense. Alan's story seems too unbelievable. Alan, David, and James were three brothers from a family of 7 sons and 6 daughters. They all lived on a farm where they developed a passion for animals, hunting, and farming. Their father, a strict disciplinarian, made his children work long hours on the farm from a young age. Disobedience to him would result in harsh punishments, earning him a reputation as a fearsome figure. The daughters of the family were known to be calm and quiet, while the sons were notorious troublemakers. Alan, the eldest, had a charm that allowed him to make many friends, but friends said he was dishonest, often exaggerating and telling false stories from a young age. Alan showed disturbing personality traits, while David, the second oldest, was apparently docile and quiet, often yielding to his older brother Alan. However, his younger brother James had a tendency towards criminal behavior from an early age. James's troubled path began at the age of 9. The three brothers were extremely close and protective of each other, never allowing one another to be harmed. As they grew older, their involvement in criminal activities intensified, with Alan often taking the lead and encouraging his brothers to participate in illicit deeds within the city. David and James were always by Alan's side, willingly engaging in these unlawful acts. This pattern of behavior ultimately led to David's arrest in 1967, at the age of 16, for recklessly driving through the city and firing a gun at random targets. The news did not come as a shock to the city's residents, as the three brothers were known to carry weapons and had a history of theft and robbery. Witnesses said they often ventured into the woods to hunt illegally when they were not committing other crimes. The three brothers often got into trouble, but they showed no remorse for their actions. 6 years after the shooting in the city, a tragic event occurred in the reserve. After a conversation with Alan, the police attempted to arrest David and James. David was later found at his residence, while James was in custody for robbery at the time. Notably, James had been released from prison shortly before the massacre. Sandra came to identify the suspects after they were arrested. Despite their denials, she was able to identify each of the men who had killed her friend. The police continued to question them to piece together the events of that night. It was discovered that James had been released from prison on November 18, and that all three had decided to go hunting. each had their own guns, 12, 16, and 20 caliber. While hunting, they accidentally discovered a fire in the forest and saw some teenagers smoking marijuana. The three brothers decided to take the drugs from the teenagers and headed to their camp. Roger was the first to discover them and stood up to confront them. He was instantly killed with a shotgun minutes after the massacre. Sandra and Alan got into a pickup truck and drove away. Stuart, badly injured, tried to stand up, then fell and died from his injuries. Dana and Michael were also killed. All three brothers were then arrested and waited behind bars for the trial to begin. Sandra expected James to be charged with rape, among other crimes, however. The judges decided that a murder charge would be enough to punish the offenders. Effectively ignoring Sandra's traumatic experiences during the trial, David Fryer confessed to the crimes and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Alan Fryer was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 4 terms of life in prison without parole on June 20, 1974. Alan was initially held in the Leon County Jail before being transferred to a maximum security prison. Coincidentally, Alan and James were both held at the facility. The brothers secretly communicated and soon hatched an escape plan. One night, Alan and James escaped from the prison in the early morning. Their escape went undetected for several hours, until one of the police discovered their empty cells. News of the brothers' escape spread quickly, causing a nationwide sensation and prompting a massive manhunt. Sandra, the prosecution's main witness, was particularly concerned about her safety. After learning about the escape, she believed that the brothers would retaliate against her, so the police provided her with armed guards. She lived in fear for days until the fugitives were finally apprehended in Gilley, Wyoming. James's trial took place in December 1974. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. Sandra spent a long time healing from the trauma she had experienced, including the brutal rape and brutal murder of her friends. Unfortunately, she faced further suffering due to the public backlash. With many blaming her for the incident, her classmates shunned and bullied her, making her teenage years even more difficult, especially since she had already had a troubled and unsupportive childhood. As Sandra grew older, she persevered and rebuilt her life. At age 26, she got married, had children, and eventually became a grandmother. Years later, in 2016, she decided to share her story by writing a book. Everyone, today we will learn about another case, the case of millionaire Ben Novak Jr. In 2009, in New York, Ben Novak Jr. was found dead in a hotel room during a business trip. His hands and feet were bound with duct tape, and a gag was stuffed in his mouth. The 53-year-old died from choking on his own blood after an attack in his eye. Get ready. This story has many important details. First, let's learn about the Novak family. Ben Novak Sr. owned the renowned Fontainebleau Hotel, a 5-star establishment on the Miami coastline. Born in America in 1907, his father Hyman was a Russian immigrant with the original surname Novik. Hyman initially made clothes and later opened his own store, but it struggled financially. He then became a manager at a New York hotel, where he hired his son, Ben, who had a keen interest in the hotel industry. Ben's career flourished, and by age 40, he had become a successful hotelier with a solid income. He moved to Miami and changed the family name from Novik to Novak. Ben was married 3 times. His first wife, Elsie, was with him for about 15 years. They faced challenges in having children, and when they were both over 40, they adopted a boy named Ronald. Unfortunately, after just 2 years, they divorced. Elsie retained ownership of a prestigious hotel that was registered in her name during their marriage. After the divorce, Ben showed no interest in raising Ronald and did not participate in his life at all shortly after the divorce. When 45-year-old Ben Novak started a relationship with 30-year-old model Bernice a year later, in 1952, they formalized their relationship in December 1954. At the age of 47, Ben opened the famous Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami, which featured 500 rooms, 12 restaurants, a nightclub, and a luxurious swimming pool. The hotel became a popular vacation spot for current and former U.S. presidents. High-ranking officials and celebrities also performed there. Many films were filmed at this hotel. In 1956, the Novak family welcomed their long-awaited heir, a boy named Ben Novak Jr., who was affectionately called Benji. He grew up on the hotel grounds with his parents and was often surrounded by adults, including celebrities. Hotel security guards primarily took care of him. And from a young age, Benji dreamed of becoming a police officer. Benji was a spoiled child, often making cruel remarks. As he received everything he asked for from the nannies, his parents were usually busy with work. His father was always occupied with business, while his mother frequently worked at the hotel but tried to spend her free time with him. Ben Novak's second marriage ended in divorce, but he maintained a good relationship with his second wife after they divorced. Benji continued to live with his father at the hotel. Ben Novak Sr. later remarried, but his third marriage was short-lived and also ended in divorce. Despite this, he continued to spend time with Bernice, and they remained close for the rest of their lives. In 1978, 24 years after the legendary hotel opened, Ben Novak declared bankruptcy due to the business's financial losses. However, he still had millions remaining in his accounts 7 years later. In 1985, he passed away from cardiopulmonary failure at the age of 78. In his will, he left his entire inheritance to Bernice and his only biological son, Ben Novak Jr. It is important to note that he left only $1 to his adopted son, Ronald, whom he had adopted with his first wife at the time of his father's death. Benji was 29 years old. He had previously worked in the police force but became disillusioned with that childhood dream and decided to start his own business. Those close to him noted that Benji transformed from a spoiled child into a bold and ambitious man, often displaying aggression when things didn't go his way. Much like his father, he explored various business ventures, experiencing both successes and failures. Ultimately, he established a company that organized conferences and conventions for other businesses, with Amway being his largest client for many years. In 1991, Benji lived in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, at 35. He had been in several relationships until meeting Narcy. Him realized he was truly in love. Narcy, who was from a large family in Cuba. She moved to the U.S. and worked as a dancer in a nightclub. Where she first met Benji, she already had a daughter, May Abad, from an old marriage, who was then raised by Bernice. Although Bernice wasn't fond of Narcy, she chose not to interfere. Wishing to avoid conflict with her son, Benji and Narcy married in 1991 and started living together. Narcy left her job as a stripper to help Benji with his business and to write books together. After their wedding, they enjoyed a lavish lifestyle, affording expensive clothes, dining out, and luxury cars. Additionally, Benji was an avid collector of Batman memorabilia, owning the second largest collection in the world, which included a 1,977 Batmobile. Among other items, he was meticulous about his purchases, always negotiating to get the best prices. In total, his collection was valued at around $2 million. It is worth noting that in Amore business, Benji saved on everything. He organized conventions for large companies and made a point to cut costs wherever possible. This careful management allowed him to preserve his father's assets, which still contained a significant amount of money, around $10 million that he inherited. Benji frequently traveled for work, as he valued his freedom and did not like being tied down at home. Although he had no health issues, neither he nor Narcy wanted children. When Narcy's daughter grew up, she had 2 sons and began assisting her mother and stepfather with their business. May affectionately called Benji Dad and had a good relationship with him, receiving financial support from him as well. On July 10, 2009, Benji, Narcy, and May traveled from Florida to New York to organize a conference for the Amway Company, which would welcome thousands of participants from various cities. They stayed at the Hilton Hotel in Westchester County, Benji and Narcy in room 455, while May had her own room nearby. 2 days later, around 7 a.m., Narcy left their room to have breakfast in the cafe on the first floor. After a short time, about 40 minutes, she returned to their room. When she found her husband lying face down on the floor, there was a significant amount of blood around him. Benji was bound, and a gag was in his mouth, indicating he had been attacked. Panicked, Narcy called 911. Then she rushed down the corridor, crying out to another hotel guest that her husband had been killed. When the police and medical personnel arrived, they confirmed that Benji was dead. Initially, investigators believed he might have been the target of a robbery. After thoroughly inspecting the room, it was found that nearly all valuables were intact. Benji regularly carried large amounts of cash to conferences, and that money was untouched. The only item missing was a gold bracelet adorned with diamonds and engraved with his name. Investigative agency was revealed that a hotel employee called the Novak family's room at 6:54 a.m. At this time, Benji answered the phone and spoke with the employee about the upcoming conference. This shows he was still alive when Narcy left the room. Security camera footage showed Narcy moving around the hotel and supported her claim that she was having breakfast when her husband was attacked. Although Narcy was taken to the police station for questioning, she completely denied any wrongdoing and claimed she had no knowledge of what happened to Benji. She emphasized to investigators that Benji was a strict and tough person who often upset those around him. She explained that on the night in question, he had worked late into the night and went to bed only after sunrise. So she had breakfast on her own at 7:15 a.m. She went downstairs to the cafe, where she spoke with a hotel employee. The employee mentioned that they did not expect many attendees at the conference. As a result, many participants are forced to buy plastic plate because they fit the budget. After this conversation, Narcy tried to call Benji on his mobile phone to share this disappointing news, but he did not answer, thinking he was simply asleep. So Narcy did not feel concerned. Narcy went to the conference room to assess the situation. Afterward, she returned to her own room and sensed something was off, but Narcy chose to take a shower. Once she entered the bedroom, she discovered Benji dead and urgently called 911. The police and ambulance arrived at 7:57 a.m. Upon investigating, the police found no forced entry. The hotel room doors were secure. The keycard data revealed that Narcy had opened the door at midnight and again at 7:04 a.m. She could not remember exactly whether she closed the door behind her when she left in the morning or if she forgot to do it. Allowing someone to get inside without a key card during a lengthy 12-hour interrogation, Narcy acknowledged that she and Benji often engaged in bondage during sex and that he enjoyed it. This raised questions about why Benji was found in an unusual position. Narcy explained that on that morning, she had tied him up during their sexual activities and left, intending for him to wait and become more aroused. She also recounted an incident in which Benji had broken her nose and then sent her to a plastic surgeon to fix it. When she woke up from the surgery, she discovered that silicone breast implants had also been inserted without her consent. When asked if she had any role in her husband's death, Narcy firmly replied, "No." She added, "If you suspect me, then bring the electric chair. I'm ready to sit on it right now." I don't want to suffer. Let me do it right now. Investigators interviewing Narcy noted that her emotional responses appeared to lack sincerity the following day, July 13. She failed a lie detector test but was released due to insufficient evidence shortly after. The autopsy results for Benji were revealed. It was confirmed that he had been attacked while sleeping. He sustained a blow to the head from a blunt object, was bound, and gagged. The attacker also his eyes, and Benji ultimately died from choking on his own blood next to Benji's body. Police discovered a pair of cheap, fake glasses resembling a well-known brand. Narcy claimed the glasses were hers. They had broken, and she had given them to Benji for repair. Detectives found it odd that a wealthy woman would own such inexpensive fakes. Those close to Benji described Narcy as very jealous on one occasion. Narcy caught her husband with another woman, leading her to erupt in jealousy and threatened to burn their house down. However, following Benji's death, she denied these claims, asserting that such incidents had never occurred. Detectives investigated Benji's banking transactions and discovered that he had been paying for an apartment in Florida for the past 2 years. Rebecca Bliss lived in this apartment. She had moved to America from Lebanon and previously worked in adult films. But after meeting Benji in 2007, she stopped doing dirty filming. Rebecca was Benji's mistress, and he covered all her expenses. He managed to keep this secret relationship hidden for a long time. However, just a few months before Benji's death, Narcy learned about the affair. She confronted Rebecca and offered make to her $10 to end the relationship with Benji and stay away from him. But Rebecca declined the offer. No one was certain if Benji intended to leave his wife, but it was clear that, if they divorced, Narcy would receive only $65 and relocation expenses according to their marriage contract. But now, Benji's multi-million-dollar fortune would ultimately be transferred to her. Investigative agency was revealed that 7 years earlier, in 2002, Benji had already been the victim of a home invasion. 2 unknown men broke into his home, tied him up, and held him hostage for an entire day without food or water. They stole valuables and cash totaling $400. Benji later told his friends that he believed Narcy orchestrated the attack instead of going to the police. He filed for divorce. Following this, Narcy began to spread harmful rumors about Benji's sexual preferences. In response, he retracted his divorce filing and continued to live with Narcy, insisting that he loved her deeply. During the investigation, detectives discovered that Bernice had sadly passed away just 3 months earlier, on April 4, 2009. At that time, she, 87-year-old, lived alone in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. As reported, after parking her car in the driveway, she got out and immediately tripped and fell, injuring her face and head. Once inside her home, she went to the bathroom to clean herself up, but fell several more times. She lay on the floor for 2 days without being able to call for help. Her body was found a week later. An autopsy revealed that Bernice had a broken jaw and teeth, along with skull injuries. Given her age and the circumstances, investigators concluded that her death was accidental. Relatives remembered Bernice as an active elderly woman who took care of herself. She called Benji every day and had a good relationship with May. Benji was deeply saddened by his mother's death and threw himself into work to distract himself from his grief. However, as time went on, he began to suspect that his mother's death was not an accident. After Benji's death, Narcy returned to her home in Florida, where May accused her of being responsible for her stepfather's death. This led to a major argument between Narcy and May, during which Narcy struck her daughter with a metal crowbar. Neighbors intervened to separate them and urged them to calm down. 10 days after, the police received an anonymous letter written in Spanish. The letter claimed that Narcy was involved in Benji's death and suggested investigating her brother, 57-year-old Cristobal Velas, who lived in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and worked as a bus driver. The police located Cristobal and questioned him, but he denied any involvement in Benji's death. detectives gathered information about Cristobal and were immediately interested in the money transfers that he had made in the last month. Cristobal had sent money to a man named Alejandro Garcia, who had a criminal history and a noticeable physical characteristic. He had only one healthy eye. The other was damaged. He almost always wore glasses to hide the defect. The detectives started to suspect that Cristobal had paid Alejandro for the murder of Benji. The crime occurred at the Hilton Hotel, where there were numerous CCTV cameras. The detectives soon found video footage of Alejandro at the hotel. Accompanied by another man named Joel Gonzalez, the police began to monitor the locations and bank transactions of both men, and discovered that Alejandro and Joel had been living in South Florida for several months after Benji's death. Investigators were exploring the possibility that Narcy had Benji murdered because she feared he would leave her for his mistress, leaving her with nothing. After her husband's death, Narcy, still in New York, received $100 from his company as the main suspect in the case. She was not entitled to inherit his assets upon returning to Florida. Narcy began selling Benji's and Bernice's property. Keeping all the profits for herself, she sold many valuables, including part of a Batman toy collection. In August 2009, Narcy appeared at the bank with the keys to 3 safes in which Benji's valuables and papers were kept. She deceived the bank employees by saying that her husband would arrive in a few hours and give his consent, even though, at that time, 7 weeks had passed since Benji's death. Nobody knew what was inside before. Narcy emptied the safes and left. Benji's body remained in the morgue for an extended period while the investigation continued. It was only 2 months after his death that he was finally buried in Queens County, New York, next to his father's grave. In November 2009, police summoned Alejandro and Joel for questioning. Initially, both men denied their involvement, but then they confessed. The investigators explained that Cristobal had found them and brought them to New York. At that time, Narcy was dining with Benji at the Hilton Hotel restaurant. While Alejandro and Joel sat at a nearby table, Narcy stroked Benji's hair and subtly signaled to the mercenaries who their target was. On the morning of July 12, while Benji was still asleep, Narcy invited Alejandro and Joel into their room. They assaulted the sleeping Benji with a baton, while Narcy directed their actions at her request. They even gouged out Benji's eyes. Cristobal then paid Alejandro thousands of dollars because carrying out the attack on the Novak family. Investigators found material evidence, including cheap glasses belonging to one of the mercenaries, which confirmed that Alejandro and Joel had been at the scene. In July 2010, a year after the crime, Narcy and Cristobal were arrested at the same time. The prosecutor's office reopened the investigation into the death of Bernice. This new investigation uncovered evidence that Bernice had also been murdered. A neighbor reported seeing 2 men in black clothing approaching Bernice's house and hiding behind the garage during a plea bargain. Alejandro confessed that he and Joel were responsible for attacking Bernice at Narcy's request. They used a gas wrench to beat Bernice, which led to her death. In April 2011, Narcy and Cristobal were charged with Bernice's murder as well. The primary motive for these contract killings was a multi-million-dollar inheritance. Narcy and Cristobal went on trial in 2012, where they both denied any involvement in the deaths of Benji and Bernice. During the trial, the investigation agency was revealed that Narcy had a secret phone at 6:39 a.m. on July 12, 2009. She used this phone to call Alejandro and Joel, inviting them to her room. They arrived at the correct floor and entered the room, which was not monitored by cameras after the murder took place. Narcy left the room casually, as if nothing had happened, and went to the first floor to establish an alibi. She had a meal at a cafe, conversed with a hotel employee, and then proceeded to a conference room. In court, when asked who, in her opinion, could have ordered the murder of Bernice and Benji, Narcy pointed her finger at her own daughter. May, Cristobal agreed with Narcy, stating that the idea belonged to May. The court also heard that after the arrest of Alejandro and Joel, a photograph of May was found in their pocket. May was to become the third victim. After the authorities discovered that May's life was in danger, she was asked to move to New York. It turned out that while still at large, Narcy hired a detective to collect dirt on May. The detective followed her and her sons, rummaged through their trash can, and collected personal belongings while living in New York. May quickly ran out of money. A local officer lent her $5,000 soon. May returned the money, but the officer lost his job because he was accused of paying May to give false testimony in court. Ultimately, Narcy and Cristobal were found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, domestic violence, stalking, money laundering, and witness tampering. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Narcy is ineligible to claim her late husband's estate. Alejandro and Joel were also found guilty of contract killings of 2 people. They were sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole 30 years later. Other participants in this high-profile case were also found. Dennis Ramirez, the son-in-law of Cristobal, pleaded guilty to the fact that on July 12, he drove Alejandro and Joel to the Hilton Hotel after the crime. Dennis admitted their involvement in the crime and received a less severe punishment. One of the key pieces of evidence that helped bring the case to a close was an anonymous letter in Spanish that was submitted to police 10 days after the murder, written by both Narcy's sister and Cristobal, who lived in Florida. She confirmed that it was at Narcy's request that Bernice was killed. Then Benji, and the next victim was supposed to be May, while Benji was still alive. He left his will inheritance to Narcy, and in her will, she persuaded to Benji include May there. After Narcy's conviction, May became the sole heir to her stepfather's multi-million-dollar fortune. But the story does not end there. Whenever it comes to a large inheritance, everything is decided quite a long time and is calculated in decades. The fortune of May was really large. 2 houses in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where Benji and Bernice lived, 9 expensive cars, and also the Batmobile, a white yacht, Lightning, and a bunk barge, large bank accounts, with life insurance payouts for Benji and Bernice. Over the years of litigation, there have been people claiming to be Benji's, and they have tried to claim the inheritance. Benji's first adopted son, Ronald, who hit rock bottom in the 2000s and even lived in the woods, suffered from mental disorders. His mother, Elsie, died in 2001, leaving her adopted son a fairly large inheritance. However, Ronald was nowhere to be found. They couldn't find him and reported him missing in 2008, just 2 days before he was declared dead. Ronald suddenly showed up and took over his adoptive mother Elsie's inheritance due to mental health issues. Ronald's money was put into a trust. Ronald was paid $400 a week and also had all his medical care paid for a year after Benji died. Ronald started fighting over his inheritance. He had enough money to hire a good lawyer and tried to sue for the property of Benji. Ronald tried to prove that May was included in Novak's will under pressure from Narcy. He attempted to deprive May of the right to inherit her stepfather, but he failed. For a decade, May Abad fought for her stepfather's money once. She needed a fairly large sum of money for her son's operation. The boy had heart problems. Then May received $50,000 from Novak's assets. Eventually, May, together with her sons, became the full heirs of the Novak family fortune. However, over the years of litigation, the total amount of the inheritance has significantly decreased. The case of Ben Novak Jr. not only exposes the greed and cold calculation of a wealthy family, but also highlights the human nature when caught up in the whirlwind of money and power. Through the involvement of Narcy, her brother Cristobal, the case proves that the most brutal acts sometimes come from those closest. The consequences include not only life sentences for the conspirators, but also the complete collapse of a family empire that was once seen as a symbol of success. The case leaves a profound reminder of the dangers of greed, betrayal, and bad choices, and becomes one of the most haunting crime stories in American history.